Good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10. I hope you had a lovely weekend. I'm afraid there's not much temptation into the shallow end of British news this morning. We will be diving straight into the deep end. This Rwanda bill probably looks like might happen finally today. Foreign Secretary, of course, described it in terms that I can't really say on the radio without waking Ofcom up. Very many senior Conservatives know that it was an absolute pile of nonsense invented by Boris Johnson to try and distract attention from something else, which pretty much anything Boris Johnson ever did you could probably describe as designed to distract attention from something else, couldn't you? And yet, Rishi Sunak elected to stay with it. I honestly don't know if there's a single person in the country who is watching the passage of this bill, except perhaps Rishi Sunak, with a sense of trepidation and or excitement. Maybe you do. Maybe your father-in-law is going to crack open the pomade if they finally get a plane into the sky, taking people to a country where refugees relatively recently have been shot dead for complaining about their food rations. A country that has been deemed unsafe by the relevant bodies, but the government of the United Kingdom have decided that you can pass legislation to make unsafe mean safe, something that Ken Clarke, that well-known lefty, former Tory Chancellor Ken Clarke, described as being akin to passing legislation to say that a cat is a dog. And he's given a speech about it, I think, at about 10:30 today. If he says anything interesting, we shall bring it to your attention immediately. I'm drawn, though, first this morning to a YouGov survey that has been conducted for The Times. They have a rather good project underway at The Times called the Times Crime and Justice Commission. It will report next April and take evidence from across the criminal justice system. The Times Education Commission and the Times Health Commission have sort of shown the way. But it is the polling today that draws my attention most, and I suspect yours as well. Voters are losing faith in the police after a spate of scandals and a rise in offences. Most obviously, it says here, shoplifting, which doesn't surprise me at all, and cybercrime, which kind of does. And the more I read into this research, the more surprised and, at first glance, sceptical I became. And I use the word sceptical simply, well, there's two reasons, isn't there, to be sceptical. Number one is that you don't believe something, and number two is that you don't want to believe something. And I'm not really in a position this morning to conclude whether or not I am... Well, I'll tell you the bit I was sceptical about. The bit I was sceptical was just guns. I just found that a little bit hard to swallow. And then, of course, I remembered that I live in a relatively cosseted world, I suppose. I mean, I don't live in an insulated corner of the capital by any stretch of the imagination, but I certainly wouldn't be able to get hold of a gun very quickly if I wanted to. And yet I read today that 1 in 10 Londoners think that they could or have come into contact with the possibility to do so. A third of the public think the police are misogynistic. That seems to me to be a fairly inevitable consequence of some of the scandals, both sort of criminal and not criminal in recent months, recent years. You know, some of these toxic WhatsApp groups that have come to light, some of the exchanges there. 1 in 5 Londoners attacked or threatened with violence. That comes from a different source. That comes from the Centre for Social Justice Research, which I think is a bit Tufton Streety. I'd have to triple check. There's so many of them these days. And that might be where the gun one comes from as well. So we'll focus first on the Times findings, on the Times polling with regard to why you don't trust officers to solve crime, why you have lost faith in the police. Now, there are two questions here. The first, you may not immediately know the answer to. Let's all stop and think for a bit, right? The problem with this in many ways is the gulf between the gulf in experience that we have. Some people, I think largely depending on where you live, but obviously not entirely, but largely depending on where you live. Some people will be neck deep in the situation being described here, whereas other people will know next to nothing about it, except, and this is where you have to be so careful, except what they read in newspapers or indeed what they hear on the radio. But I don't know what point it was at which you felt is it a fulcrum or a pendulum? What is the word I'm looking at? A tipping point. There we go. We got there in the end. Third time lucky. There's a sort of, is there a tipping point? I think I had one the other day. And I don't think I can blame this on the police. I'm not sure I can blame it on anybody. Public transport is a big focal point for antisocial behaviour for most of us. You've seen people shoplifting. You've probably become inured to the sight of somebody shoplifting. I saw a woman recently who hadn't become inured to it, and she was standing in the doorway remonstrating with a security guard in very high dudgeon because she had just watched someone walk out of Marks and Spencer's with a basket, not even a bag. It was one of the metal baskets full of food that had not been paid for. And when she raised her voice, he increased his speed. The security guard did nothing. And she started remonstrating with the security guard who, I mean, very simply put, is not paid enough money to risk his or her safety or even life in order to remonstrate with somebody who may well be dangerous. So I'm interested in the point where you lost faith in the police, but I want you to think about it properly, because I wonder whether for that woman that might have been a moment. Public transport, as I say, for me was a focal point. So I was on a bus recently coming, well, I mean, who cares where I was, but I was coming through Ealing in West London, and there was some kids vaping on the bus, and the bus driver kept telling them to stop. And there's always one, isn't there? There's always a sort of ringleader or someone who's a little bit more up for agitation, up for trouble than the others are. And he sort of refused to get off the bus and then got off the bus. And then as soon as the bus doors closed, he moved the mirror so the guy couldn't drive. This isn't criminal behaviour necessarily. But my first reaction is to think how we might help the bus driver. Well, actually, I think that's a bit self-aggrandizing. My first reaction is, what can I do to make sure I get home quicker? But I just thought, I might call the police, because he's now walking slowly in front of the bus in the middle of the road, stopping the bus from going anywhere. And then I just thought, well, there's no point doing that, is there? A, because they probably won't turn up, and B, because when they do turn up, he'll be long gone, or he'll leg it. And I'm not suggesting for a minute that that's particularly relevant to criminality or the question of crime and justice, but I think it's relevant to the perception. I just caught myself thinking, I don't know that I've done that before. The last time I called the police was when there was a knife in the front garden of a house I walked past, which is unlikely to have been left there as a consequence of a barbecue. So I phoned the police about that, and I just caught myself on that bus feeling a strange sense of powerlessness. I felt very sorry for the driver. And I felt quite cross that this young chap had such an air of impunity, behaving in a way that said very, very loudly that he didn't care about the consequences of his actions, or he didn't care about the possibility of, I don't even want to say punishment necessarily, I just want to say consequence. I mention that solely to illustrate what I mean by having a proper think about this before we kick on. Because there are two questions here. The first is, why? Why have you felt your faith in the police diminish? All right. And I don't want to disqualify anybody from contributing to this program, but you can only answer that question if it's lower than it used to be. I don't know how helpful it is in the context of this conversation to hear from people that have had no faith in the police ever, or have not had any faith in the police, which is a strange phrase to use, for 30 years. I want to know about the incident or the moment. It's either something that's happened publicly, like, perhaps the Sarah Everard murder by a serving Metropolitan Police officer, perhaps the jailing of the serial rapist who was a member of the Met's firearms unit. You could have that, or it could be something quite specific. The shoplifting thing doesn't actually make me lose faith in the police. I don't know what it does, the shoplifting epidemic. I accept two things. Number one, that the police have got far too much on their plate to worry about someone nicking sandwiches, rightly or wrongly. That's a straight prioritization. Number two, I think when you're stealing food, it's a slightly different crime, in a sense, from when you're stealing, valuables or things to sell. I know you sometimes steal food to sell, but stealing because you're hungry, which won't be all shoplifters in shops, but do you see what I mean? Just doesn't quite make me think the police are to blame. There's something rather deeper going on in our society. The combination of cost of living and criminality, the combination of need and want. So only 7% of people are confident that a pickpocket would be caught. Only 26% of people believe that the police would arrest and prosecute someone if they were burgled. I've been through that. No one got arrested. I was struck, as I've told you before, that the experience was surprising to me. I didn't think that they were going to turn up like the Sweeney necessarily, but I did think that there would be at least a semblance of desire to solve crime. I did think when we got burgled, it's a long time ago now, but I did think that they would turn up and start talking to me about what they were going to do to catch the burglars. That the sense of resignation was palpable, or just that, well, we have to come out and we have to fill in this paperwork and we'll probably send someone around to take fingerprints off the door, but don't get your hopes up. That was a moment as well, but I guess I had a lot going on emotionally. Shoplifting, the number one thing for many retailers, what felt like a low-level crime has become now more systemic. Baroness Manningham Buller tells The Times that she was in, I beg your pardon, this is the former head of John Lewis, Dame Sharon White, current chairwoman of John Lewis. I was in one of our Waitrose stores. They said they had a couple of people who came into the store and there was a particular brand of gin that they wanted to shoplift. They didn't have the brand in store and they said, oh, don't worry, we know you're going to be replenished over the weekend, so we'll come back. That's not born of hunger or need or desperation. And then you come to the question of how this has happened. So I grew up in the 1970s and 1980s. I don't suffer from in my dayitis. My father was the Midlands correspondent for the Daily Telegraph when the West Midlands Serious Crime Squad was in its pomp, and the idea that the police used to be sort of Dixon of Dock Green style paragons of virtue and public service is absurd. It is ridiculous. But I think there was a sense of public security. I think there was. And that seems to have gone. And the question of why it's gone is going to be a little bit more complicated, I think, than a one-word answer allows. So it won't just be politicians. It won't just be police. I don't want to upset anybody, but I generally, there are plenty of phone-ins where retired coppers can ring in and blame it all on the younger generation or blame it all on graduate schemes. And while that may have played a part, I'm afraid I've heard that song so often I can hum it in my sleep. I am looking for something a little more subtle, perhaps, a little more sophisticated than that, not least because the force that some of these people were members of was far from perfect. But in terms of the public's relationship with the police, okay, why? Why is faith disappearing? What is it? Is it emotional, evidential, material? What is it that explains either your personal loss of faith in the police, 0345 6060 973, or your take on the broader question of the public's loss of faith in the police? Because what I can't quite pinpoint, because of my own privilege, I guess, what I can't quite pinpoint is what it would feel like to think that contacting the police is pointless. Even in the event of what is obviously a proper or a serious crime. Okay? 0345 6060 973. And you can go as deep as you want on the public question, because I would say this, wouldn't I? But I honestly believe that if you have a Prime Minister who treats the law, both domestic and international, with complete contempt, even laws that he has enacted himself, I honestly believe, and feel free to give me a ticking off for this one, I honestly believe that the message filters through society as a form of social osmosis, that you can actually do what you want, that you don't actually need to worry about consequences. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. We'll open Idiot's Corner early because Terry's there. He says, why not blame it on Brexit? You blame everything else on that. I think, Terry, accidentally, you make a good point for the first time, possibly in 2024. I think also lying with impunity and then having people still cheering you on for your lies, that's probably created some form of cultural shift. But I don't think it would translate into actual criminality. I think that's much more likely to be Boris Johnson's contempt for both domestic and international law. And, of course, he was breaking the parliamentary rules only last week, as we learned. So if the man at the top of society can treat rules, obligations, regulations, laws with complete contempt and get rewarded by the people who control public discourse, like the editor-in-chief of the Daily Mail, Paul Dacre, then what message does that send surreptitiously or subliminally to the little people? How do we, the little people, shift somehow inside when we see the powerful people behaving with complete... I don't know. That's just a pet theory, which you're welcome to poo-poo, should you so desire. So I want the personal and the political this morning. And as I've just highlighted, the political can go anywhere. We live in a society where public faith in the police service has plummeted. And I want you to tell me why you think that is. It's 10:20. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The number you need is 0345 6060 973. 21 minutes after 10. Voters put police in the dock. Majority of Britons don't trust officers to solve crimes. Public appetite for reform as shoplifting and cybercrime surge. So before we work out what reform might look like, how you fix this, let's work out how we got here. And of course, with a side order, I suppose, of whether or not things are really as bad as some of these figures suggests, because they are polls of public opinion, ergo not necessarily public experience. Jenny's in Richmond upon Thames. Jenny, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I have two daughters, and my oldest, when she was 6, her dad and I had to have a conversation with her about not going anywhere with a singular police officer, always making sure there was at least 2. And I have to say, after Sarah Everard as a woman,
yes,
the faith there is, I wouldn't say completely gone. I have police officers in the U.S. who are family members. My dad was an undercover police officer, but a lot of it is gone. And
what was it about that case? Because, you know, you wouldn't suggest that going with your family members was unsafe as a consequence of one bad apple. So what was it about that case in particular? Is it something institutional? Is it?
Yes.
So go on, tell me more.
Yes. I think the more that came out about it, you can say that it was one bad apple, but the fact is he was known for quite some time, many different times, to have been unsafe. He'd been known to be unsafe for many different reasons.
So that makes yeah, sorry, I don't know why I'm interrupting you. You're being very interesting, sorry.
Time after time, they failed to do anything about it. And these are the people who are supposed to solve the crimes that are happening when one of theirs is doing it multiple times brazenly.
This is an important starting point, isn't it? The sense that for reasons that we will not establish in this conversation, but other callers may contribute to, the service, the police force seems, and this would be the best example of it, to have become a place where the checks and balances we would consider to be the most basic requirement for carrying a badge had been at best diluted and at worst completely abandoned.
Yes.
Now that's the second question then, isn't it? That becomes a new why that perhaps people with a bit more experience of the police service itself will be able to answer. Why have we? I mean, was it always like this, and now we just know about it more, or has something diminished in the recruitment and retention of officers? Not a nice conversation to have with your little girl, but you and your husband felt very much a necessary one.
Yes, without a doubt. And frankly, police officers in some ways have become part of the stranger danger conversation, which is awful.
Yeah, objectively awful. And yet I don't know that anyone listening to this would pick you up on that. Perhaps they might, but I don't know, given that institutional element to the case of Sarah Everard's killer and, of course, the serial rapist from the Met's firearms unit and the warning signs, the nicknames, the accusations that accompanied those two cases, which you have to presume will be tips of hideous icebergs. That idea of police officers being added to the stranger danger list must be heartbreaking for the good guys, for the good police officers. 25 after 10. Scott's in Glasgow. Scott, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I was actually phoning in kind of on behalf of my partner, as it was her interactions that have sort of led to my loss of faith in the police. She's a bank nurse with the NHS and does like a night shift every week. And almost without fail, there will be an incident every single shift. I'd say at least 2/3 of the time, and it's assaults, verbal abuse, etc. But the bit that sort of shook my faith is the fact that she says they don't really report these any longer, that no one phones the police. They know that nothing will happen as a result of it, unless there's a very serious incident and someone suffers an actual injury that requires treatment, then they won't even report it vast majority of the time.
What sort of crimes are we talking about that would go unreported?
Assault, both physical and verbal, indecent exposure seems to be a rather regular one. Things that you couldn't do on the street, that you would be arrested if you did on the street, hopefully, but that seems to just be an accepted part of being in hospital now. And
that is because once bitten, twice shy. They've called the police in the past and the response has been inadequate.
Yes, if they do send someone out, then it's very unlikely that the patient will be arrested because they're in hospital. They're seen as not being in a fit state to be arrested, and that the hospital is where they should be anyway. So the staff are pretty powerless to do anything because the person's not going to be removed. So they just need to deal with that person as best they can.
And what when you talk about losing, it's interesting, isn't it? There's two targets here. We know what we're losing faith in. It's the sort of homogenous blob of the police force or the police service, whatever we may mean by that. The people on the end of the phone and the people that the people on the end of the phone should send. We're losing faith in that as an institution, not necessarily in the individuals. But have you reached the point of blame? Have you thought about that? Whose fault is this? Is it the fault of the person answering the phone? Is it the fault of the person turning up and not doing anything? The fault of the person not turning up, or the fault of somebody much, much further away from this process?
It's the accumulation of all these factors, because, a major one will be particularly violent male patients. There will be notes, on their charts that only male nurses should be sent into that room, things like that. But they lack the staff. So, even last week she had to go into one of these rooms with a female colleague because the only male member of staff was on their break.
But that's nothing to do with the police, is it?
Well, no, but then that's how it's not able to be dealt with by the nursing staff. But equally, if the police can't then do anything.
But I'm not going to lose faith. I'm not going to lose faith in the nursing staff because of the situation that your partner has been put in, over which she has no control. And yet we're losing faith in the police over situations over which they have no control.
Well, I think it feels more that the police should be able to do something. It's that way when you're brought up. The police will solve the problem. They'll phone the police if this happens.
Yeah, I don't think either of us.
When that no longer works.
Yeah, except I don't think there's going to be many, if any, police officers listening to this thinking, well, no, you've got that wrong, pal. I didn't go into the police service to help people. I went into the police service to not turn up and to not help and to not do. I thought that oddly, unexpectedly. You talk about your partner being pushed into a suboptimal situation by the employer, as it were, or by the reality of her employment. Despite the best efforts of some right-wing media, it's quite hard to turn us against or to make us lose faith in doctors and nurses. But if I said, have you lost faith in the NHS? maybe you'd give me a different answer. Are you losing faith? Well, of course I'm losing faith in the NHS. Patient satisfaction in 2010 was the highest it had ever been. And now, after 14 years of this lot, it's the lowest. And yet, how much blame for that process should be laid at the feet of actual doctors and nurses? The police feel different. I think when we say we've lost faith in the police, we're thinking of individuals. If I say that we've lost faith in the NHS, I don't think you are thinking of the last doctor you saw. I could be wrong. I don't know. You could be wrong. It has been known. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. It is 10:34 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where a majority of Britons don't trust officers to solve crimes. I don't know how we set ourselves some pretty tricky tasks some mornings, but I don't know how you... I don't want to say police. What's the word I'm looking for? I don't know how you walk the tightrope between public perception and public experience. You can look at crime figures, and in some areas, particularly, I think rape and sexual assault, they are shocking at the moment. But more than half of the British public think the police are doing a worse job than 30 years ago. However, 37% of voters believe the police are doing a good job, which is rather more than think the government is, I think. So make of that what you will. I don't know what reform would look like. I think we'll probably have that conversation on another day. How would you change the police force? And it would be nice to hear voices from within. There aren't many. There are a lot of rules governing what you can and can't say publicly. But the point at which you lost faith in the police is unlikely to be a question that a serving police officer is going to want an answer. But why it is happening, particularly taking into account some of the strands of suggestion that we have had on the programme so far. Mick in Sutton Coldfield says, for me, the loss of faith in the police is not so much an actual loss of faith, rather a realisation that they have been degraded in their capability to carry out basic policing through lack of funding and support from successive Tory administrations. Thank you, Mick. I lean towards that, but I worry that our own footballification, our own disdain for what this 14 years of these successive Tory governments have done to the country may slightly colour my analysis. I'm not suggesting it colours yours, but I do. I'll tell you what another moment for me was when right-wing media started pretending that rainbow helmets or dancing at carnival was a big deal. Do you remember that? I know in a way it's gone on forever, but if you're skinning the police force, if you're undermining it at every turn, Theresa May giving a speech as Home Secretary in which she called police officers suggesting that cuts to the police numbers may have a detrimental impact on their ability to do their job, and she called it scaremongering. Theresa May called it scaremongering. So if you are denuding the police service, if you are diminishing their ability to do their job, and then your friends in the media are pretending that the reason why crimes aren't being solved or crimes aren't being attended is because all the police officers in the country are busy at Notting Hill Carnival dancing. We spoke to a policewoman, didn't we, who had policed the carnival in quite a senior position, and she said, do these people not realise that my people have radios? If you're in the middle of a conga and your radio goes off and says, I need you 10 minutes away and I need you there now, you run off like a bat out of hell. So for me, a moment perhaps in the betrayal of the public by the institutions would involve politician and client journalist rather than police officer. I don't know whether you fell for any of that stuff about multi-cut. So you find one police officer in one force, in one of the four nations of the United Kingdom, and they're wearing a multicoloured hat to celebrate gay pride, and suddenly that's why no one turned up when your house got burgled or your bike got nicked. I don't like to suggest you've got to be really, really stupid to fall for this crud. But you do have to be quite stupid to fall for this crud, and yet they serve it up every day. Open the Mail, open the Sun, look at Murdoch's lackeys elsewhere in the media, and they'll be serving up narratives about Notting Hill Carnival police dancing or demonstrating some sort of solidarity with gay pride as an answer to the question of why policing's gone off a cliff, while letting their friends who've been in power for 14 years off with a free pass. Not only that, of course, but coming galloping to their defence when they're found to have treated the actual law, whether international or domestic, with complete contempt. Cameron's in Bolton. Cameron, what would you like to say?
Hi, mate. It's basically my own personal experience.
Go on.
So in 2016 on New Year's morning, it'd be, I was stabbed. No fault of my own. I went to a party with my friends. We're not troublemakers. A group of lads showed up who didn't want us there. We tried to leave. yada, yada, yada. I ended up getting stabbed with a knife, and they smashed a bottle and stabbed me with that twice in the back.
Crikey.
So I had names. I knew a lot about these people, so I had it all ready to get to the police. When they came around to speak to me, it was put forward to me as not, right, we're going to do this to help you. Like, I didn't explain it like that. It was, if we take this to court, your friends aren't going to come and back you up. If we take this to court, we're going to have to put your house on permanent watch and your family will be at risk. They pretty much did everything to put me off of wanting to go through the court process. And yeah, that just knocked my...
Was there any truth in it? I mean, could it have been possible that you... Because, I mean, the way... I'm always slightly on the back foot with callers who tell me that there's a lot of detail here that I am aware of, which personally, James, am not aware of. So when you talk about you knew who these people were and you knew a lot about them, could there have been any truth in the suggestion from the police that you didn't realise quite how much grief you might be bringing to your own doorstep by pursuing the case?
I personally don't believe so.
No.
I knew all this information because a friend of mine went to the same college as him.
And why do you think the police did it? Do you think the police's motivation was to save themselves the hassle then? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, that was the conclusion I come to, I think. They thought they weren't going to be able to get it through, so why bother?
I mean, it's hard to think.
That has a knock-on effect.
Of course it does.
Because I've had things such as I had a watch stolen from me when I was out in Manchester.
Yeah.
My granddad's watch, proper sentimental value.
I'm sorry.
I rang the police with that, and after 10 minutes of speaking to them, I just got the impression they just weren't bothered. So ever since these occasions, I've just thought, what's the point?
I can't think of anything more visceral than actually being stabbed. You know, I think when it's a street robbery like that, there is a comeback that would be, well, what did you expect them to do? It's like when I got burgled, you know, my little girl was asleep upstairs, and you sort of think they're going to turn up like the Sweeney. But what do you expect them to do? And if you can't answer that question, you kind of let them off the hook. But if you've been stabbed and you know who did it, it's hard to think of a greater breach of trust, I think, in the police than that. I hope it's not a common experience, Cameron, and I hope you find a way back to having faith in the forces of law and order, because they are the only ones we've got. But my goodness me, I really don't know that is an easy place to come back from. I've actually been stabbed, and the police are, let's say, less than enthusiastic about the prospect of prosecuting the perpetrator. 10:41 is the time. James, I'm literally screaming at the radio. You're absolutely right. When you think of the failings in the NHS, you, including me, never think of the amazing staff I last dealt with. However, when people think of the failings of the police, everyone thinks of the local Bobby on the street and blames them. We have bad eggs in our institutions, I totally agree, but is that all of us? Is that even the majority? We are tired. We are bound within an inch of our life by red tape every day. We want to do more, but we can't because of the mountains of paperwork and bureaucracy. I am sick of being told how rubbish I am at my job, yet still being expected to turn up every day, grateful for my job and with a smile on my face. I'm going to read all. It's a bit long for my software, but oh no, there it is. I got to the end of it. And I don't know if that's true. I mean, I said it. I meant it when I said it. It's resonated with you as a serving police officer. But when we talk about loss of faith in the NHS, we're generally not blaming doctors and nurses. You can even have a conversation about doctors and nurses leaving the NHS in their droves, especially doctors. And still, we don't think it's their fault that the NHS is struggling. With the police, something a bit different has happened. Probably because of the media, probably because of the rhetoric that we've touched upon. Wouldn't really work with a doctor. You suggested that a doctor was dancing. If you found a paramedic dancing at the Notting Hill Carnival, would you really be able to persuade Daily Mail readers that that's why their nan is still waiting for a new hip in the way that they can do the equivalent with the police? I don't know. Philippe is in Sutton. Philippe, what would you like to say?
Hi, good afternoon. I was attacked by two guys back in 2019 that wanted to steal my car.
Right.
And it was a knife attack. I wasn't injured or anything, luckily enough. But I refused to give the keys, and they came and grabbed me with a knife, and so I threw the keys as far as I could. They still got the keys and took the car. Took me half an hour in 999 to reach someone. Eventually I reached someone. I was told to wait on the scene. I waited for 2 hours. My mobile phone ran out of battery.
Oh, mate.
And lucky enough, one of the neighbours nearby, they saw me, they saw what happened, and they took me in. So, yeah, it's just a lack... sorry, I got cold. It's just a lack of control. They just don't have enough resource, I don't think. They probably don't focus in the right area. Responding to a knife attack, I think, is important, regardless of what you're doing. They didn't respond.
Because you don't know where they're going next. What would have happened then, 30 years ago?
Sorry, this is back in 2000.
No, I know. I'm just thinking because you're part of a phenomenon where it says more than half of us think the police are doing a worse job than 30 years ago. I'm wondering.
I'm actually not British. I came over in 1979. I'm Portuguese. Yeah.
Sure.
And it's a bit different, the culture there. You're afraid of the police, and you have to be afraid of the police. You have respect for the police there.
Well, hang on. Fear and respect aren't the same thing, are they?
No, but if you see the police presence on the streets, either on the car or walking around, which you don't see in UK, you don't see that in London. I live in Sutton, you hardly see any policemen on the streets, even though they got a big police station there.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, so you go them in the police station watching the cameras to do crime prevention. What about the crime is taking place right now?
Well, it's not either or, but it feels like it is sometimes, doesn't it?
It's feel like that, and you just can't justify.
So in answer, I just don't know if I'm in charge of deciding where I'm going. I've got a finite number of police officers. Your assailants have done one. They're long gone. They're over the horizon and far away. And that's why they say, is the burglar still on the premises? And if the answer is yes, then they'll, I think, still get there as soon as is humanly possible. But if the burglar is not on the premises, then it's a nightmare for the victim of crime. But if we're going to bring things down to algorithms, what would have been achieved by getting to you sooner?
No, but I'm talking about the deterrent. The picture is bigger than that. Like the presence of police and not actually any community police at all, which we used to have years ago. All that has gone by the by. It's and also the apparent lack of control by the police. The police have no control in some of these areas and what's going on, especially if you listen to the news and the LBC, and you can see every day something is going on. And they just don't have control.
Why do we think that is?
I think it's a lack of focus. They need to refocus on the priorities, going back to what you said.
Well, who's they? Who's they?
They meaning the police force and the government.
Right.
Yeah, it's both. The mayor, London mayor, the government and the police force, they're all at fault here.
How would you make London safer overnight? Answer, more visible policing, I guess, except that, of course, to knit together your 2 points, if you've got the fear that you describe in Portugal, then that won't have a good effect. You've got huge sections of the community who have no faith at all in the police. Seeing more of them on the street, would it have a negative effect, a deleterious effect, or would it just make life better for those who do have, or want to, or are capable of having faith in the police? Philippe, thank you. There's 2 stories there in quick succession of the personal experience of crime that both hit home, didn't they? One physical, being stabbed, and one material being robbed, albeit at knife point, so still terrifying. The idea, I just don't know how naive it is of me to think that it didn't used to be like that, or that shouldn't happen. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to join in. 10:47 is the time. 10:50 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Rishi Sunak, it's Groundhog Day, isn't it? Rishi Sunak is delivering a speech about Rwanda, a policy that he thought was ridiculous when it was first framed as a way of distracting the British public from something awful that Boris Johnson had done, was about to do, or quite possibly in the case of Boris Johnson, was in the middle of doing. And on it goes endlessly. He's even got his little "Stop the Boat" sticker on the front of the lectern. It's not a podium, by the way; it's a lectern. Stop the boats! Stop the boats! 10:51 is the time. I find out shortly whether he said anything interesting, and if he has, I shall share the details of it with you. But my goodness me, 10:51 is the time. Back to the loss of faith in the police and the reasons for it, because at the moment You see, you take Philippe's call there, but you tie it with the first call we took. So Philippe, I think, persuasively arguing that we need to see more police on the street. But the first call was from a woman and a mother who has told her daughter not to trust lone police officers anymore, something that would once have been close to unthinkable. But the institutional failures, the institutional malaise that delivers institutional racism, in the case of the course of the Macpherson report, but also institutional misogyny, institutional sexism, means that for a hell of a lot of people, seeing more police on the street would not necessarily be a net good. In fact, it could be the opposite, somewhat perversely. So some of us think we need more police on the streets, and some of us think that more police on the streets would be a reminder of how corrupted the police service had become. So how do you tie those two together? How do you make that twain meet? And I do mention this repeatedly, but I'll mention it again. I don't buy the bad apple argument anymore. I used to. There's just too much now for that to carry weight. But I absolutely accept and remind you very, very strongly that these are the last line. This is the thin blue line between us and chaos. And a huge number of people in uniform and in plain clothes have a profound sense of public duty that propels them to work every day. And they listen to phone-ins like this with just as deep a sense of sadness as you do, as we do. And I'm not forgetting them. I'm not forgetting you if you are in that number. 10:52 is the time. Bisma is in Enfield. Bisma, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'm super nervous, so sorry if I sound a bit shaky.
It's only me.
So I feel quite fortunate that I've not had to, rely on the police much in my life.
Yes.
But in the last few months, there's been a couple of things that have really, really made me lose faith in the police to the point that I just don't even think it would be worth contacting them in some instances. And the first was, so I'm a new mum. I had my baby about 11 weeks ago. And in the first few weeks of her life, I really had to pluck up the courage to take her out by myself without my husband. And the first time that I did it, and I gained the courage to do that, I was in broad daylight at 3 p.m, followed by two men for quite some distance. And then while I was checking on my baby, occupied with the pram, they went into a zipped up coat pocket and pinched my phone.
Gosh.
And I know that's, it's just a phone, and it's
still a violation, isn't it?
I think that's what it is. It's just the fact that they went into my pocket. Yeah. They looked at me occupied with my daughter, and they singled me out as a target. That felt really uncomfortable. And when I did contact the police, I wasn't even asked to describe them. I wasn't asked any details. I just received a text message to say, unfortunately, with incidents like these, the police can't do anything. So, here's your crime reference number. Claim it on the insurance. So that really made me feel like, there's no point.
But what did you want them to do?
I think I just, it would have been nice to be asked a little bit, did anyone see what happened? Can you describe what they looked like? There was no sort of follow-up or anything. And I know these things happen in London all the time. I'm not, it wasn't the first time something like this has happened to someone.
Sure.
But I think for me, as a first-time mum, my mental health has been really impacted by that. And again, I know that sounds a bit silly, but
it doesn't.
I'm really scared.
Hang on a minute. It doesn't sound remotely silly. I don't want to be patronising, but I've got a little antennae now that starts twitching when people start almost apologising for things that A, they have no control over, and B, do not need to be apologised for. You were violated in a public place, and the people to whom you turned in expectation of help and support did not provide it. Now, the reasons behind that are an interesting intellectual exercise, but your emotional reaction to it is 100% justified and not remotely silly.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I think just as a first-time mum, I'm on maternity leave, and being, sort of confined to my home is not something I want for me or my daughter. But now it's, I really have to think 100 times before I leave the house because, yes, this wasn't a violent crime, but I don't want to run into criminals in broad daylight when I'm out with my daughter. I don't, that makes me feel really nervous. And the second thing, if I've got just a minute to tell you something else that's happening in my neighbourhood. So it's one of the big supermarket chains, but it's kind of the express version as it opens up across the road from me in my development. And it's a family-run franchise. And since they've opened, almost every night and every morning they're attacked by the same people. And they come in and they take all the expensive alcohol off the shelves. I've seen CCTV footage of it myself that the owners have shared with us. It's happening every single day, in the morning and in the evening. And sometimes the staff members are assaulted as well. They're pushed to the side while these people come and just clear the shelves. And they've had extra cameras installed. They've had shields put up in front of the till like they did in sort of COVID times, and extra doors put in, and they now lock the doors after sunset and only let certain people in. But it's happening day in, day out. And I've stopped going in there, and I feel really bad because I want to support their business, but I'm nervous to go in there. I've told my husband not to go in there. And when we've asked them what the police are doing, they've said the police have just told them not to interfere. And I listened to, obviously, the start of your show where you talked about shoplifting and where it's food, it's it's a different thing. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. But, it's expensive.
You're describing looting. That's looting, isn't it? Exactly. I mean, shoplifting sounds far too mild a term to describe what you're seeing. And it's covered in this Times polling as well, people turning up with bin bags, filling them up and running out of the shop. So, I mean, there won't be a police officer listening who's comfortable with what you're describing, either of the incidents that you describe. And somebody somewhere is making the decision that, I mean, what would you have to do? You'd have to have 10 police officers on permanent duty outside that shop, and that's going to be completely unfeasible for them. So I don't know. I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? It's why I'm glad we're not doing how do we fix it today, Bisma, as opposed to what are the problems. But this combination of institutional and sort of evidential experience, it's toxic, it's horrible. And Bisma, take care, seriously, and I hope you take on board some of what I said about the naturalness, the inevitability of how you feel. And forgive me for reading out this from Andrew immediately after your call, because I think it's worth reading out. You almost want Andrew to be right. He says, the 1970s just called. They want their phone-in back. Seriously, nothing in today's programme would have been out of place on LBC 50 years ago. I kind of hope you're right. And I'm always conscious of in my dayitis and woe is me. But, I mean, there are a few things you miss. Most obviously, Andrew, and if I was feeling a little less chirpy, I'd put you in idiot's corner for this. There were no mobile phones 50 years ago. So, you couldn't have had your mobile phone, Nick, could you? In 1974. But on other things, big cuts, big changes in morale, an uptick in impunity or perceived immunity. 14 years, austerity started in 2010. Elements of this phone-in perhaps would go back to the 1970s, but the lack of resources seems to me to be quite a modern phenomenon. I could of course be wrong. It is coming up to 11 o'clock, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I can tell you now that there is no shortage of evidence. My apologies to Emma and to Ruby, Vishal, Neil, Sebastian, Josh, and many others. The personal experiences, more perhaps than the meta oversight into what on earth has happened. Meta, not Met. Meta oversight into the Met is incredibly thick on the ground. I'll turn your attention next in perhaps a slightly unexpected direction. This word, I use this word, Islamophobia. Even using it, according to Sajid Javid and others, is a threat to free speech and risks creating a blasphemy law via the back door. 3 minutes after 11 is the time. I believe the lectern has now been vacated, but it still has its shiny Stop the Boats sticker on the front of it. Next week, of course, it will be the Stop the Notes sticker. They've currently got 2 stickers in Downing Street, depending on whether he is going after refugees or going off after people who are off sick. They put Stop the Boats up if it's the refugees and Stop the Notes up if it's the people who've been signed off sick. The second bit of that analysis is not true. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. Have we ever, you probably pay more attention to this, Bilger, than I do, have we ever had a phone-in about the Rwanda scheme? I'm changing the plans a bit. I just got caught there by the news bulletin and by the complete, just the utter hollowness and emptiness of what Rishi Sunak was saying. 10 to 12 weeks now, we will stop the back. Does anyone know when it started? When did it start? It feels like it started in, I don't know, 1066. We should have stopped the boats then, shouldn't we? Am I right? Hey, am I right? It feels like it started months, years, decades ago, this Rwandan rhetoric. The first flight will leave in 10 to 12 weeks. I don't know that we've ever actually had a phone-in about this. which probably is a testament to my impeccable judgment, which means I'm going to regret trying to have one now. But I just got a feeling that we should. I can't remember feeling, and I could be completely wrong about this, and this is probably the foundations of the question that I'm about to ask you. I can't remember the sense of disconnect between the public and the Prime Minister being so complete that there is a madness abroad with regard to this legislation, with regard to this bill, not least because I'm pretty confident that at least two elements of it would have, if there are many people who are passionate in their support for it, there are at least two elements to it that would have those people questioning their support for it. And those two elements are, in no particular order, it gives the government the right to deport people who can't go back to their own country because their safety has been compromised by the fact that they worked with the British military. I'll say that again. It will take away any protection in law for people who had worked with the British military as, say, translators or similar, who had imperiled themselves in order to help our troops. They're out there off to Rwanda. And the second category of people that the Lords have been seeking to protect are victims of modern slavery. People whose defence or whose reason for coming here and not being able to return to their home country is that they have been trafficked, that they are victims of modern slavery. And this government's response to their plight is sack them. We'll send them to Rwanda as well. Liam writes, please can we have a phone in only from people who love the idea? I could do with a laugh at work today. Liam, we could all do with a laugh at work today, but the problem with people who love the idea is that they don't understand it. And the problem with people who understand it is that they don't love the idea. I'm going to prove this to you in a rather remarkable way. So Andrew Mitchell, the Deputy Foreign Secretary, was on with Nick Ferrari earlier this morning, and he was speaking of the importance of seeing this legislation through to the statute book. So have a listen now to Andrew Mitchell, the Deputy Foreign Secretary, selling the so-called Rwanda bill.
So I'm going straight after this to a meeting of the Illegal Migration Committee in Number 10 to look at the plans once the bill hopefully is through today. And then the Prime Minister will be holding a press conference to set out some of those plans. But it is time that the Lords accept the will of the elected House, the House of Commons. They've made their points. The House of Commons has reiterated that we want the bill to go through in its current state. It's got virtually unanimous support within the Tory party and actually within the country. People want to see the issue of these illegal crossings tackled, and the bill will do that. It's part of a tapestry of things that will ensure that that happens. We all support the idea that anyone who served the British Army, served Britain in Afghanistan in the way that is described, should be given safe haven in the United Kingdom. And that is why we set up the Arab scheme. And it is the Arab scheme which makes this amendment unnecessary, because already under that scheme, 16,100 Afghanis have had safe passage into the UK and have settled here. So we don't think that is necessary, and that's why we've resisted it.
That's just Afghanistan, of course, for the Arab scheme. So that was Andrew Mitchell, the Deputy Foreign Secretary, speaking on LBC earlier this morning. In April of 2022, which is another reminder of how long this daft business has been dragged out for. In April of 2022, who do you think wrote this? The Rwanda solution is impractical, likely to be ineffective, and above all, extremely expensive. It is a myth that those crossing the channel and taking appalling risks in leaky boats are African economic migrants looking for a cushy new life. If only that were true. The new plan to cart them off to Central Africa makes no distinction between those fleeing persecution and economic migrants seeking to come here when they are not welcome. Who do you think wrote that in 2022? I do this quite a lot to you. I do it because I think it's fun and because I like a little bit of dramatic tension. I like a little bit of jeopardy. But sometimes the little riddles that I set for you stop me in my tracks. Alex? Can we get that? Can we get a slightly shorter version of the Andrew Mitchell, please? Just like the first half of it, because I might hit play 2 or 3, or rather I might ask Keith to hit play 2 or 3 times in the next 10 minutes, because it's the same man. It's the same Andrew Mitchell. I suppose there is a 0.00001% chance that there are 2 Andrew Mitchells in the upper echelons of the Conservative Party, and I, to my shame, have failed to notice. There is the Andrew Mitchell who is now Deputy Foreign Secretary, and there is the Andrew Mitchell who wrote in April 2022 that the Rwanda solution is impractical, likely to be ineffective, and above all extremely expensive. The only alternative is to believe that he was talking through his hat on one of the last 2 occasions. He was talking through his hat either this morning when he was shilling for the bill, or he was talking through his hat in 2022 when he wrote that it is impractical, likely to be ineffective, and above all extremely expensive. This isn't funny, all right? This is not what happens in a normal country. You know that James Cleverly, can I say that word about bat poo? I won't say it on the radio because Eleanor gets the heebie-jeebies. But they said it on Radio 4 about 10 times when they were interviewing. So the Foreign Secretary has failed to refute successfully claims that he described the entire scheme as bat bleep. Bat bleep, bat. You can fill in, bat it. They described the entire scheme thusly. He's now in charge of it. The Deputy Foreign Secretary, Andrew Mitchell, he has described it as impractical, likely to be ineffective, and above all extremely expensive, while simultaneously claiming that the majority of the country actually want it to happen. I can't remember an example of such complete hypocrisy, and Andrew Mitchell is regarded in some quarters as one of the better ones, one of the sort of more respectable ones. But to go in the space of 2 years, and the only difference, of course, is a promotion to Deputy Foreign Secretary, a previously non-existent job. Nothing else, as far as I can tell, has changed. None of this has changed. All of the stuff he wrote in 2022 is still true. Rwanda is a poor country, one of the most densely populated in the world. They receive refugees from Burundi, the Congo, and across Central Africa because they are a beacon of stability in their locality. Around 130 refugees in a country of 130,000 refugees in a country of 12 million people. But that is not the point. Those who we seek to deport will not go to Rwanda willingly. I remember when we sought to expel so-called Vietnamese boat people from Hong Kong in the late 1980s. Conservative ministers like Chris Patten and William Waldegrave were horrified at the pictures the media would procure of desperate people fighting the authorities, putting them forcibly onto planes. So nothing has changed. Nothing at all has changed since he wrote this article in April of 2022, just over 2 years ago. And yet today, the Deputy Foreign Secretary is essentially championing the bill. There's a phone in here. Who do you agree with, 2022 Andrew Mitchell or 2024 Andrew Mitchell? But that, I think, is a bit too esoteric. It's a bit too narrow, even for our purposes. It's a bit, I don't even know what the word is. Who do you agree with, 2022 Andrew Mitchell or 2024 Andrew Mitchell? The question I really want to ask, and it breaks my most golden rule of radio, is whether anybody cares. I mean, I don't want to be rude, but if you're a massive racist and you love the idea of deporting genuine refugees, I don't think you're going to be won over by this, are you? It's taken too long, and it's not going to touch the sides even of people coming across the channel in the circumstances that 2022 Andrew Mitchell describes. We will start the flights and is there anybody watching this today going, yay, I've changed my mind about Rishi Sunak. He's my man. He's my main man now. I love him. And I just can't quite conceive of the voter, the potential voter, who's looking at the pledges and the promises, looking at the long drawn-out saga, knows that he, like Andrew Mitchell and James Cleverly, thought it was a bloody ridiculous idea when it was first mooted by a Boris Johnson desperate to distract attention from something else, now pretending that it is a platform upon which even to build perhaps an election campaign. but I don't think I can ask you that either, because give me a ring if you don't care about something. Well, rules are made to be broken, aren't they? So I don't think I can ask you whether you agree with 2022 Andrew Mitchell or 2024 Andrew Mitchell. I don't think we can do a phone-in about whether or not anybody actually cares about a story, which will now be dominating the news for the rest of the day. Although I reserve the right to offer up both of those as potential phone-ins in the next 10 minutes. So I think I'm going to set you a much harder task. What I want you to tell me is, on this occasion, how has Rishi Sunak ended up in such a ridiculous position? How has Rishi Sunak ended up having to stake so much on a policy he believed at the time of its inception to be ridiculous, with the help of a foreign secretary who thinks that it's ridiculous, and a deputy foreign secretary who thinks that it's ridiculous? We know because they've said so, while all three of them simultaneously claiming that this is actually what the British public want. When, if the British public are asked a question about stopping the boats and actually want to stop the boats, I kept calling James Cleverly the foreign secretary. He was foreign secretary when he described it as being bat excrement. He's home secretary now, of course. But the question about whether or not you want to stop the boats, you might well answer yes to that. Whether or not you're going to approve of this particular way of doing it seems to me to be highly unlikely. So that's the question I want, all right? How has Rishi Sunak ended up in a situation where he, his deputy foreign secretary and his home secretary are all betting the house on a scheme that they thought, and still do think privately, is stupid? All right, 0345 6060 973. And yes, I will give you a side order of, does anybody actually care about this? 0345 6060 973. And crucially, do you agree with 2022 Andrew Mitchell that this scheme is unworkable or impractical, overly expensive? Or do you agree with 2024 Andrew Mitchell that it's a brilliant idea and everyone in the country is behind it? In which case, you'd have to tell me what on earth has changed in the last 2 years. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. And listen, I want to drive this home. That's just happened in your country, right? A man who felt strongly enough about something in April of 2022 that he wrote about how a policy being considered by the then government is impractical, likely to be ineffective, and above all extremely expensive. The same man is now a member of the government that is bringing in precisely the policy that he described thusly. And it's another one of those days where I can't quite find the words to express how far from normal this is. But that, I suppose, is Brexit Britain. It's 11:18. 20 minutes after 11 is the time. 25 courtrooms and 150 judges available to deal with legal challenges. Commercial charter planes with specific slots booked. An unnamed airfield on standby. Flights deporting refugees to Rwanda, likely or will, he promises, be in place in 10 to 12 weeks. That's the end of July, so he's already broken the promise of doing it in spring. And there is so much political capital being invested in this scheme that woolly liberals like me have to think that they believe it's a winner. They must believe this is a winner. I don't know that it's a winner. There'll be plenty of people who have a sort of vague desire to, quotes, stop the boats, end quotes, and who will not be aware of the kind of people who are likely to be deported. And in fact, many people will be unaware that it is perfectly genuine refugees who are likely to be on those planes. Ian Duncan Smith did a tour of studios not long ago supporting the scheme without understanding that you don't come back if your application is successful. Again, that's illustration, evidence of just how broken this country is politically. You've got a deputy foreign secretary touring the studios this morning to promote the proposal, 2 years ago writing about how awful it is. And you've got a supposed Tory grandee going on public broadcast, going into studios to defend a proposal that he didn't even understand. So, and of course, if the numbers of people coming here on small boats don't go down, but we're still deporting people to Rwanda, is that a success or a failure? I just don't know. Joe's in Plymouth. Joe, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Yeah, I mean, I think it's clearly just a sign that the Tories are in survival mode. You know, they're not actually I think the ones that are backing the bill have realised that they've lost so many votes from the more central or left-leaning Tories because of how they've tanked the economy. They're holding on to those very, very few straggling ones just to save face, really. You know,
so these are reform voters, then, really, that you're talking about potentially. I think. They're all fighting. There's two bald men fighting over the same comb, isn't it? Quite often with these kind of policies, because however far to the right Sunak tacks, Farage and his mates will tack further. Always.
Yeah, exactly. So they're just desperately clinging for the few votes they're going to get left, because I think a lot of the sensible voters have seen what the Tories have done to the country, to the economy, to healthcare, everything, and thought, right, we're going to jump ship. So the Tories have realised that they're not stupid, and they're thinking we need to save face as best we can. How can we do that?
Slightly wary when you say they're not stupid. I don't mean that in a cheeky sense. Desperation and stupidity are quite hard to tell apart. So, but I mean, could we both be overlooking the possibility that there is a caucus of people, possibly even listening to this programme through a bizarre sense of masochism, who will celebrate when 200 refugees are stuck on a plane to Kigali, and who will think that it's a moment of political importance?
I think they refer to themselves as the silent majority, when I don't think
but what if they are? What if they are?
Then we're all screwed, I think.
Yeah. Well, and the calculation of what they think they are doing is at least answered in part by your analysis. So the idea is to force laws through Parliament today that redefine the meaning of unsafe as safe, strip out amendments designed to protect people who have helped the British military or who have been victims of modern slavery, ordering the House of Lords to sit there and vote until it's done, which is his prerogative, and refusing to make any changes or amendments that are expected to be voted down. I mean, I suppose the question is, what is he hoping to achieve? What is he hoping to achieve with this? And the answer is votes, and the question then is whose? 0345 6060 973. Will's in Brent. Will, what would you like to say?
Well, I think the reason we're here now is because it kind of worked in 2016 and kind of worked in 2019. The sort of migration issue, didn't it? The anti-migrant issue was like the predominant issue, really, with Brexit mixed with that take back control. And similar, 2019 was all about get Brexit done. They got together a coalition, maybe an unlikely coalition of people, a lot of whom maybe didn't normally vote. That was especially true in the 2016 referendum. And now, I suppose it's one of the few issues where you can get much kind of clear separation between what the Conservatives are doing and what Labour is saying that they're going to do, because Labour's not really said very much about what it's going to do. Being very careful, but it has said it would dismantle the Rwanda scheme. So it's an issue they can say, right, OK, we've got a policy, at least we're trying. Labour's got no policy, and I keep saying that. Of course, there is a policy. It's about.
Then you've got. Then you've got this question of what it's. So you've got the Deputy Foreign Secretary today selling it for the reasons partly, presumably, that you describe, and just 2 years ago describing it as impractical, likely to be ineffective, and above all, extremely expensive. So are they deluding themselves? So is this? Perhaps I'm being a bit naive today. What we're watching is the so-called sensible ones, and I use that word very advisedly, but in this case it would be Rishi Sunak, Andrew Mitchell and James Cleverly, albeit it's not his remit anymore since he moved to the Home Office. They are trying to do what the insensible ones do, i.e. sell things that they know are rubbish because they also know that people want them, in the hope of securing some sort of political bonus.
I think they've been persuaded that there isn't any of the kind of more sensible policies aren't going to work, aren't moving.
But you don't go from thinking that it's bat excrement, as James Cleverly reportedly said, and Sunak reportedly finding the whole thing ridiculous, and Andrew Mitchell actually on the record on the Conservative Home website biting enormous holes into it, to being two, and until relatively recently, the three people in the party championing it most publicly.
I don't think they believe in the policy, but they maybe believe that it's the only thing that's got any chance of persuading a certain section of the electorate that's maybe could be persuaded to come out and vote, that they are the ones that are trying to tackle this policy, and those sort of like three-line slogans kind of worked for them in the past. You stop your votes, get Brexit done. They think, OK, a lot of people don't have attention on the detail. We may, follow the Westminster thing. We may notice that Andrew Mitchell said exactly the opposite, or very different things 2 years ago, but large sections of the electorate, especially the ones that don't pay much attention to politics, won't notice those things, don't really care about those things. They just sort of care about the policy. And
how long do you think they've got? How long do you think they've got? So let's say that a plane takes off at the end of July. It'll be the middle of summer, of course, and the likelihood is there's absolutely no evidence at all that the prospect of deportation to Rwanda is going to act as a deterrent. In fact, I think the absence of that evidence is part of the reason why they needed to bring in a little bit of political sleight of hand. I'll have to check on that. So the crossings are likely to be at their peak at that moment. The people we're talking about, I'm always slightly wary of typifying people as not paying attention, but you're obviously right. The people you're talking about, the ones who don't pay particular attention to facts, like Andrew Mitchell's complete U-turn without any accounting or explanation, what do they do when they see the flight take off, but they also read or hear in the news that the numbers of people crossing the channel aren't going down at all?
I don't think it matters really, because the Tories can still say that this is what we're trying to do, and maybe it's even better that there isn't actually time for it to happen, because they can say, well, we haven't had time yet for the policy to kick in, but if only the others, had let us do this earlier and hadn't opposed us, then we would have had time to demonstrate this as an effective policy. So it maybe even works in their favour that there isn't time for it to work, because it's unreasonable to kind of expect it to work. They may still be able to argue that it will work. We just need another term in office.
And so it goes into the Brexit pot. Is that there is a brilliant idea, and it's not our fault that it hasn't worked. It's all the fault of the people who didn't like it.
Yeah, I think so.
It's called a ministerial direction. The Rwanda scheme required a rare ministerial direction because there's no evidence it will deter channel crossings. So we are looking at another example of what we've been looking at in large part since 2016, and that is smoke and mirrors and gaslighting.
Yeah, no, I think so. It's all that really kind of is available to them now, and the polls aren't moving from kind of trying to be sensible.
They're not moving on anything. It'd be interesting to see whether or not we think that. But do you think the polls will move at all on this, Will, finally?
Well, it could do among some people. There's some people who are not captured by the polling, isn't there? Just as there was always in the Brexit referendum, who this sort of but who may be persuaded to go out and vote if there was a massive kind of campaign of accessing them, telling them this is
take these people, take these people in these boats described so powerfully by 2022 Andrew Mitchell, and use them as the new kind of threat, the new othered part of the population. Sick notes plus boats. So people off sick and people in small boats. It can conjure up enough hatred of them that might just make a difference to the polls. Do you know what? I'm going to do something I stopped doing about 2 or 3 years ago. I'm going to say I think the British people are going to prove themselves to be better than that. I accept the rhetoric of stopping the boats has a willing audience, but I don't think there's anyone who wants them to stop who is going to change their opinion about this policy when it is actually enacted. I don't think you win over new people with this sort of politics. You just are desperately trying to cling on to the ones that you've already got. It's 11:30. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. It's 11:33. A few texts. First from Terry. Surely stop the boats is the UK's build the wall from the orange misogynist. He's got quite a lot on his plate at the moment. No matter what they do, the fanatics will sadly believe it, vote for it, and even join insurrections to support it. New and better government needed urgently, James. Shane says, if you want to see the true measure of a man, watch how he treats his inferiors, not his equals. I have no idea who said this originally, James, but it's 100% true of the current Tory party. They've turned into the nasty party that Theresa May warned against. I agree that immigration needs to be controlled, but treating desperate people like cattle is absolutely not the answer. And that, I think, if you were to read the entire article, is pretty close to the position held by 2022 Andrew Mitchell, that's why he drew in comparisons with so-called boat people from Vietnam being forced against their will onto planes in the 1970s. He wrote this article from a place of compassion for the actual human beings caught up in the story. But there is, of course, no rule for compassion for these people in the current Tory government. So what's going on? Paul's in Manchester. Paul, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. First-time caller, long-time listener.
Welcome.
Welcome. I am autistic, so I see the world a little bit differently.
Okay.
I don't think they ever intended to put people on planes and send them to Rwanda. I think the entire thing is a gimmick. Because you're telling me that the British government couldn't get rid of people that they don't want to be here. In addition to that, I think because of the demographic problem that we've got, I mean, we need people.
Yeah, but not these people.
Well, that's their view.
Yeah. The problem is, when you said they, it's such a fluid term in 2024. So they didn't think anyone would get on a plane. So let's say that Suella Braverman did, because she dreams about it, she told us. But Boris Johnson didn't give a hoot one way or the other. He just thought this was quite a useful way to appeal to or distract from or just do something that was in Boris Johnson's best interest. He probably didn't think it was ever going to happen.
No.
James cleverly described it as guano before becoming Foreign Secretary and therefore having to cheerlead for it. We know that Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, thought it was ridiculous. So we don't even know who they are, Paul. When we talk about they, we might as well be talking about 100 different people with 100 different opinions, up to and including Andrew Mitchell, who is they, not he, because 2022 Andrew Mitchell thought it was a stupid idea, and 2024 Andrew Mitchell thinks it's absolutely brilliant. So who are they?
Who are they?
Who are they, Paul?
Well, they don't want to be identified.
And frankly, who can blame them? 11:37. Natasha Clark had the dubious privilege of attending this press. Does he do more press conferences than some of his predecessors, or is it about this? I seem to have been one only last.
There was one on Friday about welfare reform. So
that was
it does mean that we've had two
in 2 days, really. Two days. Business days.
Well, some sceptics might say that if you're a Prime Minister that's expected to lose a lot of seats in the local elections next week, you might want to try and get on the front foot with your fight back and to try and see off any potential Tory challenges. That would be my interpretation of it.
It's fair.
But yes, I've just come back from that Downing Street press conference where Rishi Sunak is gearing up for a fresh fight today with the House of Lords. Obviously, he tried to use the press conference to talk about what would happen next with Rwanda, but it's important to note that it's not passed yet. We're expecting them to sit as long as it takes, he said, all night, if possible, to get it through the House of Commons and the House of Lords. Now, we're in what's called ping pong at the moment. It goes back and forth until the two sides can agree. The Prime Minister did say that he sounded pretty confident to me that it would be done by the end of the day. And his message to them was essentially that the government were as ready as they could be to get those flights off to Rwanda as soon as possible.
Most importantly, once the processing is complete, we will physically remove people. And to do that, I can confirm that we've put an airfield on standby, booked commercial charter planes for specific slots, and we have 500 highly trained individuals ready to escort illegal migrants all the way to Rwanda, with 300 more trained in the coming weeks. This is one of the most complex operational endeavours the Home Office has carried out. But we are ready, plans are in place, and these flights will go come what may.
He also admitted that he would miss his own self-imposed deadline for those flights to take off in the spring, as he's promised before, and now admits that it won't happen for another 10 to 12 weeks, so we're looking at July.
The first flight will leave in 10 to 12 weeks. Now, of course, that is later than we wanted, but we have always been clear that processing will take time, and if Labour peers had not spent weeks holding up the bill in the House of Lords to try to block these flights altogether, we would have begun this process weeks ago.
So he says there are courtrooms ready for any potential legal challenges, which I think is the next potential step on this, if it does indeed pass tonight. He said there are 150 judges which could sit if need be, that they now have a capacity to detain 2,000 people. 200 trainer caseworkers were ready to go and 500 people ready to escort people on these planes, and also an airfield on standby. Now, I didn't get a question at this press conference today, but my question was going to be, well, how much is having an airport on standby and on standby going to...
spend the weekend in Bristol?
I didn't, actually. Well, near Exeter, actually.
That'll be it.
Exactly, that'll be it. It's rubbed off on me. But my question was going to be, how much extra is it going to cost for all of these caseworkers and to have an airport essentially on standby? I'm so sorry. Excellent. For the next 12 weeks until that does happen. So, yes, it was a really interesting press conference. I think Rishi Sunak's message to the Lords...
Did anyone ask these questions?
We didn't ask on the cost, no. I think we as the press pack did not ask on the cost today.
And the cost, is estimated already to be exponential.
350 to 400 million has been spent already. We're going to spend another 50 million as soon as these flights do start. But yes, it's going to be quite a lot, I assume, to have an airline.
It's going to be more than £1 million per refugee in the first instance.
And one of the questions we'd like to ask is this really good value for money? And how many people have to fly off to Rwanda before you will consider it? Now, the PM said that he wants to see rolling flights take off. He wants a steady rhythm of flights taking off in the next few months. Now, that's interesting.
But the houses, of course, into which Suella Braverman told us these people were going to be moved have in large part been sold.
Yes, around 70% of it's been sold off. So the Rwandan government are going to have to find somewhere else to put them that's not that hostile.
Of course, we haven't heard from them yet, have we? Because they sometimes turn up a little bit late in the day and rather stick a bit of a stick in the spokes of Rishi Sunak's chopper.
They do indeed. Nice metaphor, I like that.
Thank you.
But yes, we did hear from Paul.
Stand boy for more.
Stand boy for more. I'm never going to live that one down, am I?
Charming.
Very interesting also that I think it means that we're not going to get a summer election because he's going to need to have the time for these flights to firstly take off. And if he does want to see a rolling rhythm of flights in the next few months, that's going to take a while. We could see a court challenge. I don't think we're going to get an election now until the autumn at the very earliest.
Unless the election coincides with the first flights taking off.
Potentially. You could imagine a Prime Minister feeling quite buoyant if indeed he feels that that's going to help him in the polls by saying, right, I've done what I said I would do. You've seen the first flights to take off to Rwanda. Now let me finish the job. Let's call that election.
What if he misses this deadline?
Well, he's missed that last one and he's blamed the House of Lords and the Labour Party, so I imagine he'll probably just do so again.
This probably doesn't work on the radio, but I have before me a rough breakdown of the seat distribution in the House of Lords, Natasha.
He will be shocked, I'm sure, at the distribution of those seats.
Well,
if quite a lot of Conservatives.
There's a very large Tory majority in the House of Lords.
Someone should tell him.
Well, why does he keep saying it's the Labour Lords that are doing it? He knows it's not true, but he thinks it's politically effective?
It is politically effective. He wants to put the Labour Party as being...
Ken Clarke was one of the biggest critics, of course, of the Rwanda.
I think in terms of the numbers, yes, it is. The House of Lords obviously are split into Labour peers, in terms of Tory peers, in terms of crossbenchers as well. And it has been a mix of all three of them, which has been repeatedly blocking these plans. So yes, it is absolutely right to say that it is not just Labour peers that are blocking this legislation. In the House of Commons, of course, is a very different matter.
Are Labour doing? What is Labour's position on this?
So Labour essentially wants to put forward two amendments, and that's what we're seeing get basically ping-ponged between the House of Lords and the House of Commons at the moment. It's on exempting veterans and Afghan refugees specifically, Afghan interpreters from this new Rwanda plan, so meaning that they would not be sent to Rwanda ever under that plan. They also want to make it so that until an international committee declares Rwanda a safe country, the law cannot essentially say that Rwanda is safe and ready to send refugees to. Those are the two main things the government just will not concede on.
If it was just the Afghan amendment, do you think they would?
I think that's the potential to be the one that is more likely.
It's an odd one to hold everything up for, really. Because it's probably, if you sell it right, it would be popular with the public to say, we're not going to... ARAP goes some way towards protecting these people, but under most expert readings, Andrew Mitchell's comments this morning notwithstanding, it doesn't quite go far enough, some people say. The
problem being that if you essentially accept this amendment, you're essentially saying that ARAP scheme is not fit for purpose, and I don't think the government want to admit.
So it can't do that, and it can't let an independent assessment determine what is safe and unsafe.
The whole point of this is meant to be that it's meant to be declaring it's safe no matter what, and it's meant to be overturning the Supreme Court ruling.
Safe no matter what, by which you mean safe no matter how unsafe it is shown to be.
Yep.
That's not semantics.
That's what this law will say, that Rwanda is a safe country
Whatever
in
happens,
the eyes of the UK.
Even if it catches fire
even
tomorrow.
Even if it changes.
Even if 47 volcanoes erupt in the overnight, it will still be safe to send people there. Even if it turns into a hotbed of civil war and then it will still be safe. That's what I don't think people fully appreciate the strength of this legislation. It would literally say if Rwanda was in flames, it would still be a safe place to which to send. Rishi Sunak prefers the phrase illegal immigrant, but of course, or illegal migrant, but of course, the bona fide genuine refugee will be on this plane as well.
And the House of Lords have tried repeatedly to put on amendments that will essentially give it a time limit. So, once a year, say, well, is Rwanda still safe? And to give it assessments on a regular basis, just in case, like you say, the situation does change in Rwanda. It's not long ago they had a genocide over there. So it's a fair point to make.
More recently that they shot refugees dead for complaining about their food ration. Before you go, a word, if you would, about Andrew Mitchell. I don't know, because you're the political editor, you pay more attention to these things than I do. Here is Andrew Mitchell, or here is somebody called Andrew Mitchell, right? Speaking to Nick Ferrari this morning, so that would be April 2024.
So I'm going straight after this to a meeting of the Illegal Migration Committee in Number 10 to look at the plans once the bill hopefully is through today. And then the Prime Minister will be holding a press conference to set out some of those plans. But it is time that the Lords accept the will of the elected House, the House of Commons. They've made their points. The House of Commons has reiterated that we want the bill to go through in its current state. It's got virtually unanimous support within the Tory party and actually within the country.
And there's another chap with the same name. He's called Andrew Mitchell.
Sure, it's definitely the same Andrew.
Well, that's what I'm asking you. You're the political editor. I'm just a gob on a stick. Well, I'm going to have to read this out, actually. Stand by. This is from April of 2022. Okay, so just 2 short years, 2 very, very long years, almost to the day. Such is the nature of these things. Someone called Andrew Mitchell, described as the MP for Sutton Coldfield and a former International Development Secretary.
Like
so some clues there.
Sounds like the same person.
So he wrote in 2022, the Rwanda solution is impractical, likely to be ineffective, and above all, extremely expensive. It is a myth that those crossing the channel and taking appalling risks in leaky boats are African economic migrants looking for a cushy new life. If only that were true. The new plan to cart them off to Central Africa makes no distinction between those fleeing persecution and economic migrants seeking to come here when they are not welcome.
Those are very different statements, aren't they, James?
Has anything changed as far as we're aware?
Something really big that's changed since Andrew Mitchell made those comments.
So do we do this now, or do we come back after the break?
I think many of our listeners should be able to really find out the answer to that.
Go on then.
You want me to tell you? Well, he's come back into government. That's what happens when you come back into government. You have to essentially put all of the thoughts that you put before into the bin, and whatever the government
says... About which you felt strongly enough to write an article for Conservative Home.
Yep, Andrew Mitchell's opposition to the Rwanda policy is very well known, very well documented, and yet he has been forced to essentially eat his words and say it's a wonderful thing, because that is the beauty, the joy of collective cabinet responsibility, so that people like me in the media don't pick up and go, why is one of your cabinet saying one thing and one of your cabinet saying the other?
It's 11:47. It is 11:51 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where I guess we're just in that slightly weird space, aren't we, which we've been in many ways since 2016. Do your feelings matter? Of course your feelings matter, and your feelings may well inform your vote in an election, or even in perhaps a referendum. Your feelings matter. Do your feelings have any basis in fact? Well, that's irrelevant to the question of whether or not your feelings matter. You can believe something that is demonstrably not true, and you can act accordingly. This is the greatest flaw, perhaps, in democracy as we understand it, in that your vote, as someone who believes the earth is flat, is worth exactly the same as the vote over there from someone who believes that the earth is round, or believes that we need to breathe in order to survive, versus someone over there who thinks that you don't actually need oxygen to respirate as a human being because it's all under the control of some enormous sky lizard. I exaggerate, but only a bit. And that's the problem. So there is a feeling abroad that people crossing the English Channel in small boats are dodgy. There is a feeling abroad that everybody who doesn't look exactly like you is dodgy. gets fed an awful lot at the moment as well. And that there is a feeling in the Conservative Party that if we can make what looks like a meaningful change to the ease with which people cross the channel in small boats, that will be good for us. But even if we can't make a meaningful change, the more performatively cruel we can be to the people who are doing it, the better that will play to the feelings of the people over there. Which brings us back to the first line of this, which was, do your feelings matter? Of course they do. And these feelings are probably based in fact. Here are some refugees. We're going to treat them appallingly. How do you feel about that? Bloody fantastic, James. They've got my vote. I was flirting with the idea of going with Farage's lot, but I'm all in now. I'm back with the Tories, back where I belong. All that sovereignty. I'm drunk on sovereignty. We took back control of our laws. And you did what again? So how come you can't... We took... Yeah, stop asking me to explain things, James. You can prove anything with facts. I feel good when I think about refugees being deported to Central Africa, especially when I read big old snowflakes like Andrew Mitchell describing it as a pretty grim scheme. So I just guess we're here wondering how many people there are in that category. Hannah is in Tring. Hannah, what would you like to say?
Hi.
It's Hamish,
James,
not... God, I need to get my glasses cleaned. Hamish, not Hannah. Exactly. That would have been... Yes, well, carry on. Hamish.
Transphobic. Anyway, good morning, James. Yes, I just wanted to actually add to what you said. You've probably summarised what I was going to say quite well just a second ago. I think this is nothing to do with migrants or number of people on planes or how many people actually physically get to Rwanda. I think this is a performative policy, as you say, designed to win over those Conservatives who are about to go to Reform. Reform is a single policy party.
What is the single policy? Forgive me.
And anti-race,
right.
anti anyone who's non-British.
Well, I'm sure they would dispute that, and no doubt point to lots of candidates who but that's your opinion, and you're perfectly entitled to it.
Well, enough, because what we've been doing, we've been living the gradual demise of the Conservative Party since the 1970s. Europe brought down every single leader since the 70s in one shape or form. And the Conservative, we don't need a Conservative Party anymore. We don't need to conserve the empire anymore. We're all of us, all voters are living their horrible, throbbing death via the ballot box. And they're prepared to spend a lot of our money on trying to salvage their identity.
Will it work? Let's say you're right, and it tallies with much of the contributions this hour. And this is the only constituency to which Sunak is speaking, even as he makes himself feel dirty, even as Andrew Mitchell, James Cleverly, Rishi Sunak know in their hearts that this is a stupid idea. If perhaps they're not as bothered as you are by the performative cruelty of it, but they know that it is, to use Andrew Mitchell's own words, extremely expensive and almost certainly ineffective. Yeah. Are there enough people? Are they selling their souls for a high enough price?
I think it will work. Next Parliament, we're obviously likely to have a Labour government. I say obviously, who knows?
Yes.
But we're likely to have a Labour government. But likely to be 7 major parties in Parliament: DUP, SNP, Green, Liberal, Conservative, and Labour, and Reform. And because of that, they're just trying to stop the flow to Reform. Will it work? I think because it's a single policy issue, the people who are really rabidly excited by this sort of thing are likely to be hoodwinked by this. I think they're likely to stay to say, the Tories are doing enough, I'm going to continue to give them my vote. And it's just about salvaging the Tory party. Not for this election, it'll be the election afterwards, where they'll want some form of platform in which a phoenix can rise. But they're just trying to stop the rise of Reform.
And I mean, just by way of a hair split, I don't think there's any polling showing the likelihood of that 7th party actually getting a seat, but the polling could change, and the fear of them taking bites out of Tory votes in constituencies where that would let in another party is obviously going to be quite animating, going to be what you describe. I think a quick thank you, Hamish. A quick idiot's corner. So John is still texting me, making point. I don't mean John is still texting me. I don't know whether he's ever texted me before, but John is still labouring under the illusion that if you are coming here from France, then you're not a refugee. I can't help you, mate. seriously, if you're still subscribing to that sort of bilge now, after all the years of having it explained to you, often in words of one syllable, then I actually now fully absolve myself of responsibility for your ignorance. Okay? I'm looking after my mental health. I'm being kind to myself. I can no longer deal with people as thick as you. So that's what Idiot's Corner is for. Have a great day, John. Last word on this to Alex, who's in Camden. Alex, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Hi. I thank you for having me. I finally found the courage to talk to you after a year, and I'm really terrified.
It's only me. It's only me. Go on. What do you want to say?
Yeah. So I'm an asylum seeker. I've arrived here on a small boat across the English Channel over a year ago, and ever since I've been I've been stranded, and I've been issued the threat to be deported to Rwanda last year, and ever since nothing has changed. I'm not able to move on with my life. I get this feeling that the government is putting us to be a burden on purpose because there's basically political capital to be gained. And what breaks my heart is that people talk about value for money. Is it value for money to send refugees to Rwanda? It is as if we are being discussed as commercial property, not human beings. We are human beings with souls. We have aspirations. We have hopes. And talking to us as cattle, basically, to be shipped away, really breaks my heart.
Tell me a bit about your aspirations and your hopes, Alex.
I want to be a filmmaker. I'm literally writing a screenplay at the moment. I want to make a movie one day, and I have no capacity at the moment to be creative or innovative because I'm haunted by this nightmare. I'm having nightmares every single night because of this threat, because I have to go to the Home Office every 2 weeks to report, and I'm liable to be detained at any moment and shipped away to a country I've never known existed a year ago. And it really, really makes me depressed and afraid. But, I have friends here that support me. I want to thank my friend Serena. She's listening, and she's my guardian angel.
Why are you an asylum seeker, if that's not too blunt a question?
Yeah, I come from a region of the world in North Africa where I faced some political intimidation back home from the authorities. I was detained and unlawfully detained, and I saw a lot of intimidation in my time in jail. And after my release, I was basically blacklisted. I didn't feel safe anymore. And people really bother me about that because they say your country doesn't have war, your country, you didn't face any threat of death. And people really don't understand the stretch of the reasons why people become refugees. It doesn't have to be war, it doesn't have to be death. People are running away because of their sexuality, because of their political opinions, because of their religious opinions or lack of religious opinions. And yeah.
How confident are you that if your application were to be properly processed, it would be passed, that you would be granted asylum here?
I would say somewhere north of 60%. I have a good lawyer, and partly because of my friend Serena, she's been really like a second mum to me, and she really gave me a home here in the UK. And that's why people don't connect asylum seekers, because they don't know asylum seekers. They don't listen from asylum seekers. They just read about them, and they are fed these lies about us. I think if we manage to put a face to the story, we give a voice to the voiceless, people will start to look at us as humans, not subhumans to be treated as undesirables.
And finally, Alex, I'm just interested in the length. I just want to get my words right. The length of time so you are in a limbo now, and every time you hear the word Rwanda on the radio, or every time you see the word Rwanda in the newspapers, you are not thinking, "Gosh, I hope my application is processed." You're thinking, "They don't want to process my application. They want to."
Exactly. I have all the proof. I have all the emails from the Home Office, and it literally says, "We will not consider your case. We will not give you an interview. We will not listen to you." So I don't even have the right to be heard, the right to speak up.
Because you came via the small boat route and the so-called safe and legal routes, as the Tory MP Tim Loughton pointed out. at a select committee not long ago with Suella Braverman are non-existent. There is no safe and legal route. And finally, actually, why did you want to come here?
Well, people want to be in a place where they think they can integrate, where they think they can be understood and welcomed. And I speak English. I was so passionate about English that I taught my English as a young child watching The Simpsons, actually. So people want to go to a place where they feel they can belong. And I feel that I can belong, culturally speaking. And I felt that the UK is a safe haven, but I think that dream is being shattered by every single minute.
Well, I wish you well, Alex, and you know that not everybody is like the kind of or the possessors of the kind of views and the kind of opinions that. Well, you know that because you listen to this program. But I do wish you well, and I hope that this weird nightmare, because you are the human beings that they are using as what you describe as political capital. They really are denying your humanity in a sense in order to win over the votes of the kind of people that we've been examining and describing with previous callers. Thank you, mate. It is 4 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. 7 minutes after 12 is the time. I've got a weird one now because I think I used to steer clear of this subject. I know I've done it a few times in the past, but I've begun to reach a point where I thought it was pointless. I've explained this to you already, so forgive me for repetition. Partly Brianna Jai's mum, Esther, talking about the need to wean teenagers off their smartphones. And even when she came out and said that, and I didn't interview her myself, but I heard her being interviewed in lots of different places, I was a little bit embarrassed by my reaction. Is that the right word, embarrassed? I felt, because my reaction was, oh, dream on. You're such an amazing person and you're dealing with your grief in such a powerful and impressive way, up to and including the compassion that you demonstrated or that you sought to demonstrate towards Brianna's killers. I just remember thinking, oh, dream on. Or I wouldn't have put it quite as brutally as that. But do you know what I mean? It's like we need to stop young people using their smartphones. I said, you might as well talk about the need of getting genies back into bottles or stopping the tide from coming in. It's just such it's an unclimbable mountain. And as the weeks have passed, and it isn't that many weeks since Esther was touring the studios on this mission, as the weeks have passed, two things have happened to me. One is that I have come to think that the plan is plausible, that the goal is achievable, that there is perhaps, with the right will, with the proper political and I suppose parental will, then we might actually be able to coin a phrase, get this particular genie back in the bottle. And the second thing that's happened is that I think that the momentum is building, that they're quite hard to separate. Is my conviction changing because the momentum is building? I think we can be fairly confident, even with my proclivity for self-importance, that momentum has absolutely nothing to do with my convictions. The momentum is not changing because my mind is changing, but are our minds changing because the momentum is I guess it's chicken and egg, isn't it? It's a perfect chicken and egg scenario. Some people, as they see the growing clamour for change, will begin to believe that change is actually possible. And that must be where I was. There must have been a point. I probably even pointed it out to you at the time. I've subsequently forgotten. There must have been a point in the last couple of months where I suddenly thought, you know what, maybe this is actually doable. And the stories then begin to gather pace. You get a sort of snowballing effect. So momentum is not just speed, it's also size. And the snowballing effect today reaches a head teacher in West London, an outstanding school, the head teacher of a school rated as outstanding, who is sort of trying to introduce what would once have been called cold turkey with regard to the phones. Anybody my age thinks immediately of Zamo Maguire in Grange Hill when I use the phrase cold turkey. A Just Say No campaign. I read this story twice. I heard Nick talking about it this morning. It had dipped under my radar, actually. And I read it twice to try to understand exactly what was going on, because it's a little bit misleading. The school offering a 12-hour day to break phone addiction. And then I thought, well, what do you mean? You can't do that. What about the teachers? Who's going to be? And then I realised what he's actually trying to do is snap the relationship between the child and the phone. I went a bit animated then, actually. If you're watching this on YouTube, you will have enjoyed that. Snap the relationship between the child and the phone. Don't forget to like. Ding ding, is it? Ring the bell. So, give me a thumbs. Give me the like if you're watching on YouTube. More and more popular on YouTube, this program, which is very gratifying because it means that I can't come to work in my pajamas anymore. You'll be noticing soon that I'm looking quite spruce, looking quite well turned out. Trim the old beard this morning just for you, just for the YouTubers. I completely lost my thread then as a consequence of getting distracted by the camera in my own studio. I've really got to grow out of this ludicrous behaviour. He's trying to snap the relationship. It's not about we're going to get children off their phones by making them go to school for 12 hours every day. You're going to do it for one day. You're going to have a Tuesday where it runs from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And that will mean that the children learn that they don't need to be on their phone all the time. And I think this is fascinating. Because nobody knows what's going to work. And the more people that try and come up with theories and solutions to this problem, the more likely we are to actually get there, the more likely we are to actually solve it. So already the school does something that quite possibly you don't do or your children's school doesn't do. You already have to keep your phone in a bag or a locker. So you can take it to school with you, but you stick it in a locker. If you are seen with your phone at this school, it's confiscated and locked in a safe for 5 days. Something that not all parents are happy about. Many parents, I read in the Times this morning, complain about such confiscations, to which the response of the school is tough. That's the rules. Them's the rules. And if you don't want to have your phone confiscated for 5 days, don't take your phone out of the bag or out of the locker. And I think that's fair enough. I think when the system is clear and in place, then the rule is not by definition draconian. Okay? I mention this rule because without this rule in place, you wouldn't be able to bring in the policy that he's bringing in now. And the policy that he is bringing in now is that on Tuesday, as in tomorrow, in order to almost teach children that they do not need their phone. Is he offering a cure for what the kids call FOMO? He is, isn't he? He's essentially coming up with a possible cure for FOMO. So FOMO is the fear of missing out. Fear of missing out. FOMO. And I think we all recognise that. We all recognise, particularly if you spend too long on social media, so on Snapchat or Twitter or Instagram or what's the other one? TikTok. You just sort of think you can go down, you know, there's nothing inherently unhealthy about it. My algorithm is fascinating at the moment. I'm getting Friends clips and table tennis clips. You know that it must measure what you watch longer. And if you watch something longer, it changes your feed to feed you more of the stuff that you watch longer. And I love Friends. I make no apology for that. I think it's the finest television program ever made. Absolute genius. Genius on every imaginable level. Don't even at me. But I hadn't even clocked that I was getting into table tennis clips. Now I'm getting table tennis tuitions left, right and centre on my social media feeds. And the problem is that you start watching one and then you watch another. And every now and then, with me more than anything else, it'll be Twitter. I say, well, what's going on Twitter? Oh, my God, I'm trending again. Let me turn that. No, I'm not. I'm just saying that, you know, that is my peculiar experience. If you think there's a chance you might be trending, I suspect FOMO is probably even bigger than it is if you're never going to trend in a million years. To which I would respond by saying, be careful what you wish for. So the idea here is that it will snap the addiction. He calls it a 100% addiction among children, and I think he's right. It is addictive behaviour. It creates anxiety. He describes an apathetic generation. And then you've got the further consequences, like the risk of online crime or the damage that it can do to your health. Kids are texting themselves at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. He describes how, alongside the very serious problems, such as gaming through the night with people in different time zones, cyberbullying, blackmail, even sexting, but also a growing inability to make eye contact, to hold conversations, or to make friends in real life. And I think that he's right. I don't think that we've got moral panic here. There's always going to be some of the symptoms of moral panic. It's going to feel like a moral panic. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking if it walks like a moral panic and talks like a moral panic, then it's probably a moral panic. But this is not a moral panic. These phones are doing things that video games did not do. That sneaking into the cinema to watch an 18 movie did not damage us in anything like the ways that the Daily Mail editor told us it was going to. It's just true that this is different. This is literally engineering that is designed to maximize the amount of time that we spend staring at something, interacting with something. It's literally engineered to do it. And it's in our pocket 24/7. There are hardly any circumstances, even if you're driving in traffic and you pull up at a traffic light, there is a voice in your head, there's a craving inside, I better just check that thing. I'm just going to check. It's illegal, but you still do it. So the idea that we should be dismissive of children or unsympathetic of children is absurd. And I quite like this proposal. So 7 o'clock Tuesday morning, you turn up at school, you put your phone in a bag or in a locker, and then you've got your normal curriculum, you've got your normal timetable, and on top of that, they're throwing in some art classes, drama, dodgeball, basketball, cookery. They're even going to give you dinner. They'll even serve up a hot dinner at the end of the day, because if they can extend the amount of time, during which a child is not able to access their phone, then you get the possibility of snapping this addiction. And I think it's a wonderful idea. I really do. The question, of course, is twofold. Will it work? 03456060973. Will it work? But the more interesting question, perhaps, is how did you snap yours? I love the idea of someone just tuning in now, having no idea what we're talking about. Let's not give it away yet. Someone's just tuned in, 12:18. So there's a bloke on the radio. He wants to know how I snapped mine. I don't know what he's talking about. I'll try and work it out. So you know that your relationship with it is not healthy. You know that in an ideal world, you would be spending a lot less time together than you currently are. But you also know that it is a proper challenge to break that bond. It is a proper challenge to snap it. How did you snap it? Because if it's hard for a 40-year-old to snap it, it's going to be hard for a 14-year-old to snap it. Have you snapped it? Have you successfully snapped it? 03456060973. What help can you give to other people keen to snap theirs? 034560609. What can we learn from the story of your snap? What's he talking about? What is snapped? What's snapping? That's what I want from you now. So I don't know who can answer the question of will this work? But if you think that person is you, give me a call. 03456060973. I hope there are lots of people listening who've snapped theirs, and they will all be able to answer the question of how did you snap yours? 03456060973. And if you are going to tell me after the story of how you snapped yours, I'd love to know also, as you would probably expect, I'd love to know also how it's changed your life since you snapped it. How has your life changed? Because in some ways, painting a picture of an improved life post-snapping will provide an impetus to the rest of us to try to snap our own. 03456060973. So, a head teacher is to extend the school day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. this week in an effort to help his pupils snap it. Do you think that will work? And secondly, how did you snap yours? It's 12:20. 22 minutes after 12 is the time. A pal of mine has been in touch, actually. She's just WhatsApped me, funnily enough, to say, I am that person who has just tuned in. WTF is going on. It was in Glastonbury, I think. You had to be there to appreciate the quality of that one. It's good to know you're listening, though, Vicky. Thank you. I want to know whether or not we think this scheme will work. And I might take one call without telling people who tuned in later exactly what it is that we're discussing. But I promise I won't prolong your misery for any longer than that. In fact, I'm sure in the course of this call with Kerry, it will become clear what exactly it is we are talking about. Kerry is in Croydon. Kerry, how did you snap yours?
Well, I went to Glastonbury when I was 2, so it was very young.
That is young.
But anyway, no, for many years I was kind of very involved in sort of like Facebook and Twitter. And when my daughter was born, and she's now coming up to 10,
right,
I realised I was spending more time on Facebook in these sort of like long, rambling political debates with
with who?
uncles.
With who? Family people?
Sometimes with family people, sometimes with other people, sort of like arguing about Brexit and these people that just... I'm married to someone who's Dutch, and so I was very, very against Brexit for many, many reasons, but not least because it would affect my own family very directly, and I was upset with my own dad and my uncle for being pro-Brexit, and you know, all of these things.
Yeah.
All of these things. We heard it all and we saw it all. We were there. You especially bought a T-shirt.
Yeah, but remember, I get paid.
Yeah, I didn't, and I was spending more time in these sorts of debates, in these sorts of online spaces, than I was with my own baby daughter.
Wow.
And my baby daughter's beautiful and wonderful and so much more interesting than any of my family members. Cotton stock.
Yeah.
And so the first one to go was Facebook because it was eating so much time. And then about 3-4 years later, I got off the Twitter as well because that one I just wasn't getting anything positive from it. Like, it was good to keep up with some news, but...
Well, that's not true anymore. I think, what was it that happened last week? Something happened last week, and I just realised that the days when you would go there in pursuit and certain confident pursuit of expertise and up-to-date news, breaking news, eyewitness accounts, Elon Musk has managed to completely destroy that in an incredibly short amount of time. So how has your life improved?
So, for one thing...
Where are you, by the way?
I'm sorry, I'm on the train to Victoria.
Oh, that's fine. Carry on. I just quite nice and noisy. What? How has it improved your life?
So basically, the main promise that Facebook made to us was, we'll let you keep in touch with your old friends, with your family members, with all these different people. And now it just gives them a call, and we have chats, and we have like proper conversations. And
that's nice.
We don't need to just argue. We can just talk about...
But can we learn anything from your experience for these children? I'm not sure we can we? Because
my daughter's now 10, and she's coming to that age where her friends at school have all got phones now, or are starting to all get phones, and I'm having to have these conversations with her about it. And we're trying not to go down sort of like the arbitrary route of no to everything just because I say it so, and I decided it wasn't a good idea for me. And just discussing with her about, and treating her like an adult, and discussing with her about, look, there's evidence that shows it isn't good for young children, especially young girls. And talking about
just explaining
her own health.
So I mean that is prevention rather than cure, isn't it? And what this head teacher, Andrew O'Neill at All Saints Catholic College in Notting Hill, is doing is cure. He's dealing with people that have already got what he describes as a 100% addiction. But I think you're right. And in fact, Jayesh makes a similar point. He says, I've dramatically reduced the amount of time I spend on social media. And I think the reason why I was able to was that I worked in the industry, where we were focused on how to do exactly what you describe, increase the length of time and keep you engaged. So I do think that if you teach people in schools at an early age about engagement, about how we try to manipulate their attention, then you will have been taught the con. If you've been taught the con, you have a greater chance to remove yourself from the con. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it can't make things worse, can it? Having a deeper understanding of what is going on. So how do you snap the relationship between a teenager and their smartphone? Do you think this will work at 7 a.m., a 12-hour shift when you're not allowed to touch your phone? I wonder if we should all do that. We could all do that tomorrow. Problem is, you wouldn't be able to tell me how you were getting on, would you? Because your phone would be in a box. James is in Hemel Hempstead. James, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James.
Hello, mate.
Great name. So I've got an 11-year-old son and an 8-year-old daughter. My son's going off to high school in September.
Yeah.
So I'm really intrigued by this proposal. I think it will work partially. I think the other side of the conversation, the other side of this is what are the parents doing at home? And I think, that's kind of key.
Yeah, listen, easy to say that where you are now at this point. Trust me, in 3 years' time, it's unlikely you'll be thinking that in private, and you certainly wouldn't be ringing up the radio to say it in public. And it's irrelevant to the challenge that this head teacher has set himself. But tell me what you are doing. How are you? Because the challenge you've got is what happens when every single one of his mates have got one.
Well, we're well and truly into that territory now.
Right.
We've always said to our kids, 11 is the age at which the earliest you can get a phone. So, of course, on his 11th birthday, that's the thing that he wanted. What me and my wife, we went through. We went round the houses on this one. What do we do?
Yeah.
Obviously, we did a little bit of research. One of the things we did do was, so we got him a phone, but we didn't get him a mobile contract. So we said, okay, learn how to use a device first of all before you add on to, the mobile side of things.
Yes.
We made him sign a contract when we gave him the phone and said, here are the things that you need to do, that you're responsible for, and here are the things that we're responsible for. So he signed that, so he understood what that is. So I think, you set the boundaries early and the expectations early as to sort of...
Do you think it will work?
The mobile phone contract between me and my son.
Well, all of it, because I hope it does. I've been a bit snarky when I say, "Oh, wait, just you wait." Just you, the best laid plans of mice and men gang after glay. But I mean, you're doing something,
100%.
and are you doing it? Because I mean, the story around at the weekend was the kids aged sort of 5 or 6 having unsupervised access to.
Well, this is the key, right? It's a supervision. It's when your kids are at home with the devices, what they're doing. One of the lines in the contract is he's not allowed the phone in his room alone, for example, or any device.
These are all pretty solid, aren't they?
Well, they are, but as you say, it's can we maintain it into his teenage years, and should we maintain it into his teenage years? At some point, you've got to give possibility. So,
I suspect if you're an outlier now by being on top of this, I suspect that in a couple of years, perhaps by the time your daughter is his age, I don't think you'll be an outlier anymore. I just sense the oil tanker turning around, and considering I was adamant that it was absolutely impossible to turn it around, I do find myself surprised to be saying this out loud. I could be wrong, of course. The oil tanker might turn out to be stubborn, and the effort that's put into keeping people or tempting them in. And, of course, for every James, there's someone out there who's got an 8-year-old who's already got a smartphone. And that was the story around at the weekend. But I wonder whether, actually, in order to recognise the damage it's going to do to our children, we need to better recognise the damage it's doing to us, which brings us back to snapping. How do you snap? How did you snap your relationship with your smartphone? Thank you, James. Take care. Tim Humphries here now with your headlines. It's 12:34. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So a little bit of self-promotion. It wouldn't be the James O'Brien experience without a little bit of self-promotion. I'm in Glasgow on the 17th of May, the I Write Festival, which is a splendid event and looked to be under mortal threat as a consequence of council funding cuts, is back on. At least parts of it are back on, and also they've received a donation, I think, an anonymous, generous donation, which means there'll be even more events than originally planned. But I'll be at the Glasgow Royal Concert Hall on the 17th of May of this year. It's a beautiful venue and a beautiful person on stage. Me. So I'll see you there. Because the reason I'm back on the road is the paperback's out on Thursday. The paperback of How They Broke Britain is officially published on Thursday. It's fair to say that events since the hardback was published in November of last year have not done much to dent the central thesis that the country has been broken by a combination of secretly funded lobby groups masquerading as think tanks, client media, and corrupt politicians. Morally corrupt, more than legally corrupt. But, the night is young. And the new chapter features a chap you may have heard of, chapter 11 now of How They Broke Britain, features a chap called Rishi Sunak, with cameos from 30p Lee and Suella Braverman as well, who actually have been overtaken by events, really, given that one of them is no longer a Tory MP and the other one is no longer in the cabinet. But I kind of predicted that in the book. There's also an index, which is quite exciting for 2 reasons. Number one, it makes me feel like a proper grown-up author. Yeah? Oh, yeah. Number 2, you can find stuff really quickly. I know what you're thinking. Yes, James, that's how indexes work. I know what you're thinking now. You're thinking, is indexes actually the plural of indexes, or is it perhaps indexi or indexy or something? But the point is this. I know how indexes work. but I've never had a book with an index before. And I wrote the flipping thing, and I am finding it useful to be able to find very quickly precisely the little bit of research that I referred to. So even if you've got the hardback, even by my standards, this is cheeky. Even if you've got the hardback, personally, I would also buy the paperback. Perhaps you could give the hardback to somebody and keep the paperback for yourself. 12:36 is the time. How did you snap it? How did you break the bond between you and your smartphone? Because you know you're on it too much. Head teacher in West London thinks that a 12-hour uninterrupted shift where the children in his charge can't go near it might help. He can't prove that it will, but he cares enough to try. And thank God for teachers like that. Somebody's going to have to take up this baton. And I just want to know what worked for you. And, of course, alongside, or indeed what worked for your children, which I suspect is an even bigger mountain to climb. And also, I mean, if you've got something interesting to say on whether or not this scheme from this head teacher will work, then I'm here for it. Indices, it would be. Would it be indices? The plural of index is indices. Is it? No. Is it? What's the plural of index? Indices. Or indexes. We'll get an hour out of this tomorrow, lads. Sigel is in Hounslow. Sigel, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'd like to say I'm in full support of this headmaster based on my personal experience.
Yes.
I invested in an Amazon phone safe. Admittedly, it was quite expensive for what it was, £70 for a bit of plastic and a lid.
Yeah.
But it had a timer on it. So my routine then and now is if I'm going to bed at, say, 10 o'clock in the evening, I'll put my phone in this phone safe and I will set the timer for around 9 hours. Okay. Yeah. So if I'm waking up at 6 o'clock, I'm not getting to actually access my phone until 7 o'clock in the morning. So for the first hour, I'm able to then implement a really, really productive and healthy morning routine, which involves not accessing the phone. So I'm not seeking that dopamine chemical fix that is obviously associated with sex, drugs, etc., etc. And I'm then able to wake up.
Just to clarify, you weren't getting sex and drugs off your mobile phone. You're talking about the chemical that's released in your brain when you are having sex or taking drugs, but also when you're getting that hit from social media. I just felt Keith's little face. I've just prompted me then to point out that that's not what you were actually describing. Certainly not at 6:30 in the morning, Sigel, on a work day.
No, you have a wicked sense of humour. So that.
What made you do it? What pushed you to that? Because that's quite extreme behaviour, quite strong self-knowledge as well, perhaps. But what was the clincher? What made you do it?
A variety of things. If we go back to 2017 and we look at what Sean Parker said, ex-president of Facebook, he said when we created Facebook, we knew we were taking advantage of a human vulnerability.
Yeah.
And my routine prior to that, I worked in corporate estate agency 12 hours a day. So I was coming home at 8 o'clock in the evening and just spending 2 hours on my phone and going to bed at 10 o'clock in the evening.
Yeah.
And I just looked at my routine and thought, this is not healthy. And then I'd reach for my phone in the morning as soon as the alarm went off at 6 a.m.
Of course. And just start noodling around looking for stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And I just said to myself, I cannot live my life like this.
And did you try more moderate methods before you went for the safe?
Yes, but I just found I had a bit of an addiction to social media, and now I'm not on social media. And I even find WhatsApp a little bit addictive, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah,
so I do have to use this.
So you broke it. How quickly did you? And presumably, I don't want to go into too much detail. Actually, no, that's not true. I want to go into loads of detail. But surely you can override the safe, can't you, as the owner of it?
I can't. It's time safe.
So apart from getting a chainsaw and actually smashing it open, that is it. Once you've closed the door, that timer is completely hack-proof.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I physically can't get into the safe. And for anyone who's listening out there are cheaper versions now around.
Well, you didn't tell us how much yours cost, so don't worry about
that. Okay.
I think that's brilliant. It's a bit like what the teacher's doing, isn't it? Actually,
it is. It requires a growth mindset. It requires a lot of self-discipline.
Yeah.
But it enables me to wake up in the morning now, work out or meditate, have a healthy breakfast. And you and I are both old enough to remember what life was like without mobile phones, James. We're not millennials. We're a slightly older generation.
Yeah, thank you.
And and the worst thing we do in the morning now is maybe just hit the snooze button rather than reach for the phone.
And how would you describe your improvements to your mental health?
It's been really good, really good. And my emotional health too, and my spiritual health.
Because the head teacher talks about anxiety and various other, and we don't notice that happening. And even if we notice it happening, we're probably not immediately going to attribute it to our phones. And yet there it is, that sense of, I mean, you can call it FOMO, which is probably a bit of a euphemism, isn't it? It makes it sound quite funny. But this idea that there's something really, really important unfolding a hand reach away, and there isn't. And the only way you can prove to yourself that there isn't is by weaning yourself off, by going cold turkey overnight.
It's worked for me. It may not work for everyone.
No, I love this. And you did mention the price of it. I've got all sorts of pedants now pinging me with £70.
Yeah.
So you can get cheaper ones. But my goodness me.
There's cheaper, smaller versions for around £30 now.
Priceless for you.
You can't put a price on your mental health.
You can't put a price on your mental health. And in some ways, you can't put a price on your time. And the time that you've wasted, it doesn't mean you're going to be doing something productive. As Sigel said, you might just press snooze and go back to sleep. But that's better for you than getting straight onto TikTok or go, wow, I love that. That's self-prescribed safe. I could see a mum buying a safe for a child and saying, right, we're putting it in the safe until the morning. But to do it, that is absolutely fascinating. Is anyone else tempted to try that? And to be fair, all I check in the morning is the weather, the travel, and whether or not there's a Lime bike available nearby if I'm going to cycle into work. And that's become quite annoying lately. I mean, who are all these people who pick up the Lime bikes? That's it's people going home late at night, isn't it? Yeah, cool. So I go to bed and check the Lime bikes, and there's loads around. I get up in the morning, they've all gone. But I'm lying to you, aren't I? Of course I then have a little look at Twitter, see what's going on. And I used to kid myself, it was, well, I need to check that because it's work. But Twitter's not useful work anymore. The days of Twitter being a reliable news source, as an earlier caller pointed out, are long behind us. I wonder how many people... If you are thinking of trying Sigel's plan, which is how we shall know it henceforth, Sigel's safe, there it is, Sigel's safe, drop me a WhatsApp. 0345 6060 973. Do you see what I did there? Yeah. Social media, WhatsApp. Yeah. I take a break actually and come to Vanessa first because I don't want to squeeze you into the small amount of time available. So listen, I'm not being funny when I say send me a WhatsApp. I'm saying I'm just interested to know whether Sigel's little suggestion there, which took me completely by surprise, has actually resonated with you as much as it's resonated with me. The timer on it. It's not just the safe. One of mine actually wanted a safe, tried it with the safe, but you can change your mind. That's why the idea of the timer being there is fantastic. How many people are listening to Sigel and thinking, do you know what, I might have a little look at it, I might give one of those a bit of a whirl. I might check it out myself now, actually, while you do this. It is 12:48 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A lot of people doing this. I have a safe with a timer. My 3 teenagers hand them in before bed, get them back after breakfast. It's Perspex with a timer and even has a little gap so you can charge your tech overnight. It's the best thing we've ever bought, says Felicity. My friend Scott, there's always one, isn't there, has been in touch to say, what if, you can sort of hear the tone of voice in a text like this one. What if, though, your house suddenly starts burning down in the middle of the night? Hey? Can you not call the fire brigade until after 9 a.m? I'm pretty sure he's thought of that, Scott. Old Sigel. He sounds clever enough to be. Probably still got a landline in the house, and you can't use your landline to go on apps and what have you. Quite a lot of people looking for this. Quite a lot of people drawn to this. And listen, you can send me a snarky message saying, alternatively, you could just have some self-discipline. But that's the whole point, isn't it? But using a safe involves self-discipline. They're just different flavours of self-discipline. If you had enough self-discipline not to use your phone, you wouldn't be listening with interest to a phone-in on the radio about snapping the relationship between smartphones and their users. Unless you've managed to get to 12:49 without realising that you shouldn't be listening to this conversation because you've got so much self-discipline it doesn't even apply to you. In which case, who's the mug now, eh? Who's the mug now? You are, for listening to a programme about people who haven't got self-discipline while sitting there congratulating yourself on having so much self-discipline. I would need a safe. Vanessa's in Wood Green. Vanessa, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
So I would just like to say that how I sort of improved my situation.
Snapped it is the phrase that we're using.
How I snapped it. I used to stay up until the really early hours of the morning, just watching YouTube quite mindlessly, and it got a lot worse with YouTube Shorts. I turned off the history tracking on the YouTube app and on when you do it mobile as well.
Yes.
Sorry, a desktop. And because when you take away the history tracking, the algorithm stops learning about you, and then it presents. And then if you try to go onto it, the first thing you see is something that actually really doesn't appeal to me, or that I don't know if it appeals to other people, but it'll be something that you really don't want to see, maybe something a bit perverse, is women and really a lot very scantily clad, and it just really puts you off.
Stuff that other people perhaps are enjoying, but which has got no relationship or bearing whatsoever on your search history, and therefore, if you stayed on there for a little longer, it would eventually quite quickly throw something up that makes you go, oh, I've had enough of this. I've got better things to do. And that works. That's really good. That's really solid, actually.
Yeah, it really helps. I've just pretty much overnight, just really.
Why did you do it? Did you just think this just isn't very productive? This isn't a very sensible use of my time?
Very, very much that. But I was also I was also at a stage of my life where I was really, really busy, and then I'd use YouTube and to sort of wind down, to sort of just relax. And then I find I'd be getting actually quite a bit more stressed because I'd see people with their perfect lives. It'd be a YouTube video about just something else, but you'd see their house was immaculate, their makeup was immaculate, their outfits were immaculate, and it'd make me feel worse about myself. So I'd be trying to watch a video about politics or whatever, and then I'd be so distracted by how everything just seemed to be really put together about them, and I'd watch more of that where everyone seems like they're having it so much better whilst doing the other thing that I was interested in.
Drives you potty. I love it. And it worked overnight, literally.
Yeah.
Actually. Not just metaphorically, but literally.
Yeah, it can't give you stuff that draws you in and pulls you into a 3-hour binge.
And that is going to be, I guess, if you can break out of it when you're a little older, then the sooner you do it, the quicker you do it, the more important it is. I love that. Thank you, Vanessa. It is 12:52. Do you know, I don't have any notifications on my phone. I was talking to Keith about it during the break, and one just popped up. I said I told you I didn't have any, didn't I? I've actually got one. I only set it up this weekend. Can you guess what it is? What I've allowed notifications for? The only thing on my phone that you're allowed notifications for is Duolingo. Duolingo, it says, Hi, it's Zari. I just know you're not going to forget to practice today, right? It's in English. Obviously, otherwise I wouldn't be able to read it. I'm trying to learn Greek better. I'm trying to improve my Greek. So there you go. That works, though. So you've got to be careful. 12:53 is the time. Chris is in Cowbridge. Chris, what do you reckon?
Hi, James. Good to talk to you. By the way, I have to say I am a massive fanboy of your books.
You don't have to say it, but it's very nice that you did. Hey, thank you.
Yeah,
carry on.
But I've done the audio, I've got the hardback, and I've got your paperback coming out. I've done the whole lot.
Thank you, mate.
I'm keeping your family in shoes.
You are,
anyway,
all of them.
The purpose of my call, 2 years ago, I quit all social media apart from LinkedIn because I have it for work. But I basically deleted everything. I'm very much in the industry, like I think one of your texters said. I use the data in my work as part of social media campaigns to basically market products and to basically keep people engaging with content.
Yeah.
It's part of the business, and it's what clients pay for. They look for paying for more engagement with their products to tell a story about their products and blah, de, blah, de, blah. Anyway, about 2 years ago, I was getting disenfranchised with the whole way that it's used. And I saw Sheila Fogarty talked about a documentary called The Great Hack. I watched that, and it's a story of Cambridge Analytica and how it affected Brexit, which I know is not something you know a lot about.
Well, you do if you've read my books.
Well, I was being sarcastic. And after watching that, I just made a decision. I gave notice 2 weeks to everybody.
Hang on, how did you? So did you change job then, or did you somehow manage to still do it for work, but you weaned yourself off it in your personal life?
I have a moral dilemma. It's part of what basically pays the bills, but personally, I think. So,
you've got a moral dilemma. What was the other documentary called, where all of the Silicon Valley broskies were saying, "I wouldn't let my own children anywhere near it, but my entire fortune is built upon making sure that your children are." So that's just, you're a smaller version of that. You mean, look, mate, we all got to earn a living, and that's fine. It's not your job to regulate the sector. It's the job of government and politicians.
I saw that, and I just thought this is like a blessing that's become a curse, a bit like TV and the car and what have you, an aeroplane. And I actually have changed my job where I don't actually deal with social media because I just think it's.
You felt like a drug dealer.
It's like a creeping evil, and everybody's really into it. It has lots of benefits, but it's kind of just gaslight us into this way of working with phones. And now I use my phone for being a phone.
Well, no, I hear you. The Social Dilemma, it was called. And if you haven't watched that, goodness me, you probably should. Good for you, man. I seriously, it's making proper change, meaningful change, even to your own material detriment. Last word on this, I suspect, glancing at the clock, but you never know. Melvin is in Ladbroke Grove. Melvin, what's going on?
Hi, mate. I'll try and be as quick as I can. So I haven't stopped using social media, but I've cut down drastically. And one of the reasons I've done that is because I read a book that I think would be really good for lots of people to read or listen to.
Yeah.
And it's called 10 Reasons or 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now.
Fair enough.
And it's from a guy called Jared Garnier.
Used to work at Facebook.
Yeah. And basically the premise is that social media is turning everybody into royal douchebags and basically turning the users into commodities for businesses.
How do you make it easier? How do you turn down the volume, if you like, on the siren calls to you to log on and check in the notification? So what have you done, sort of?
So two things. I removed the accounts that I don't really need.
Yeah.
One of which was Snapchat and one of which was TikTok.
Yeah.
Because nothing really useful on there. I still get sent those videos, but one video sent is different to having access completely.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is I've unfollowed a huge amount of things and people because it's quality, not quantity. I don't need to know every update from Sky Sports and Will Smith. So I've unfollowed them. If I want to find out what's happening, but, if I want to know what's happening, I will go to their account directly, but I don't need a notification to come up or it be
so you're
automatically in my
curating differently. That's interesting, as opposed to the ping, because the ping is the thing, isn't it? The ping is the thing that gets you to go and check it again and to give up more of your time. Think of it as transactional. Hello, I want some of your time, please. And you're sort of giving it to them hypnotized rather than working out whether or not this is something you want to swap for some of your time. We've got one problem, Melvin.
Go on.
What if you need $5,000 to pay off some bad people and need to call a 78-year-old colleague in the middle of the night? Oh, that doesn't work with you. That only works if it's in a safe. Stan sent me that, and I thought it was brilliant, so I stuck it on hold, and I thought I'll save that, and I'll hit a caller with it, but you're not putting yours in a safe, are you?
No. I've just cut down how much I use it. So I've given myself a limit with Instagram, for example. I'll only use it for 10 minutes at the time. That does happen 2 or 3 times a day, but I set myself a limit.
And you enjoy it?
and I enjoy it.
And you know it's coming to an end. All right, I'll try again. I'll try again with a moment of light. In future, Melvin, you keep Will Smith's name out your damn mouth, all right?
I will do.
Got there in the end. Thank you to Liam for that. I don't write any of my own material, obviously. That's what AI's for. That's it from me for another day. Thank you to everybody who contributed to the programme. If you missed any of it, don't forget that you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, or you can watch it. It's not live on YouTube. Every time I mention that you can watch me on YouTube, someone goes, I can't find it. It's not live on YouTube. But it is on YouTube. But you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick. But now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
No pings at all.
Ping
my
free.
Policy.
Pingless.
Ping free. I'm a ping free person.
A ping-free person.
Yes, ping-free
Peter
person.
Piper picked a ping-free perfect.
Exactly. We've
Lovely.
updated that one.
Yes.
That tongue twist, we've updated it. 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 Tongue twist,